Hello friends, welcome to Sleeper Scientist. Did you know that nearly 80% of the people who watch my videos aren't actually subscribed? If you're enjoying the content, I would truly appreciate it if you clicked that subscribe button. It helps out a lot. Also, please don't forget to drop a like and share your thoughts down in the comments. By the way, where are you tuning in from today? Let me know below. Have you ever worked a job where the silence is just overwhelming? A place where you can physically feel the pressure sitting in your eardrums? Where you are completely alone in an area covering miles, accompanied only by the bitter wind cutting through metal cables and your own breath fogging up right in front of your eyes. Working the night shift at Copper Ridge Resort, deep in the Colorado Rockies at an altitude of 3,350 meters, is exactly like that. My name is Callum Rafferty, and I've been operating the ski lifts up here for 6 years. During that time, I've meticulously inspected cables, checked the cabins, and ensured everything was securely locked down before the very first lift opened at 8 a.m. Of course, it is a highly solitary job, but that's exactly how I prefer it. It's just me, the massive mountain, and the stars shining so brilliantly from this altitude that they appear close enough to touch. I am telling you this because what occurred 3 weeks ago changed absolutely everything. And I need you to fully understand that I am not the kind of guy who just sees things. I don't drink while on the clock. I don't touch drugs. I'm a 52-year-old man with a mortgage, a daughter currently in college, and a solid reputation for being the absolute most boring son of a gun on the entire mountain staff. So when I explain what I witnessed, I need you to believe me. It was February 16th. I distinctly remember the date because it was my daughter's birthday, and I had phoned her right before my graveyard shift kicked off at midnight. The resort had officially closed its doors at 9 p.m., and the final members of the evening maintenance crew had cleared out by 11:30. It was just me left, preparing to start my rounds. The primary gondola system at Copper Ridge runs straight from the base village up to the summit. It's roughly 2.5 miles of heavy cable spanning across 3 massive pylons. Each cabin accommodates 8 passengers, and there are 42 cabins in total. My specific duty is to ride up inside the maintenance gondola, halt at every single pylon, inspect the wheel assemblies and cables, sweep for ice buildup, and make sure everything is primed for morning operations. I engaged the lift at 12:15 a.m. The maintenance cabin is distinctly different from the standard passenger units. It is much smaller, fitted with heavy equipment racks, and boasts superior interior lighting. I had my trusty thermos of coffee, my digital inspection tablet, and my tactical radio clipped securely to my belt. Just a completely standard night. The initial pylon sits about a quarter mile up the slope, right where the dense trees start to thin out. I arrived at the structure at 12:23. Everything read as normal. The temperature was holding steady at 18 degrees, the wind was blowing at maybe 5 miles per hour. Absolutely perfect conditions. I documented everything into my tablet exactly as I always do. Cable tension nominal. Wheel assemblies, 0 visible wear. Ice accumulation incredibly minimal. I radioed my status down to the base station. It was purely standard procedure, even though I was fully aware nobody was actively listening. The night security guard on duty, Marcus, was highly likely fast asleep inside the warming hut, his phone playing whatever media he streams all night long. I climbed back into the maintenance cabin and continued my slow ascent toward Pylon 2. That is the exact moment I first noticed the light. At first glance, I simply assumed it was a stray reflection, perhaps the moonlight bouncing off one of the passenger cabins suspended ahead of me. However, the moon was heavily hidden behind thick clouds that evening. Besides, I had been working this specific mountain long enough to instantly recognize what every single light source looks like up here. This was entirely different. It was hovering roughly 30 feet directly above one of the empty passenger cabins, maybe 6 cabins ahead of my current position. It was merely sitting there, completely motionless, not swaying in the wind at all. Just a steady, piercingly bright illumination. Looking exactly as if someone had managed to park a spotlight in the dead center of the freezing air. I leaned forward, squinting aggressively through the scratched maintenance cabin window. The light was a pure, intense white, verging almost on blue-white, and it was significantly brighter than any headlamp or industrial spotlight I had ever encountered. It wasn't harsh, though. It didn't physically hurt my eyes to look at it. It was simply existing. My immediate, logical thought was a drone. We occasionally get idiots flying drones around the resort airspace, usually during the summer, desperately trying to get aerial footage for their YouTube channels or whatever. But in the absolute middle of winter, at midnight, in these freezing temperatures, a standard drone battery would ice up and fail within minutes. I grabbed my tactical radio. Base, this is Callum. Are you currently seeing anything weird on the exterior cameras? Heavy static. Marcus, are you there? More static, followed by a sharp click. Yeah, man. I'm here. What's up? Are you actively watching the north face cameras? The gondola line specifically? Nah, I'm doing my foot rounds. Why do you ask? Can you check them immediately? I'm seeing an unidentified light up here. A distinct pause. What specific kind of light? I honestly don't know. That is exactly why I'm asking you to check the live feeds. I heard him release a heavy sigh over the speaker. All right, give me a quick minute. The gondola continued its steady crawl. I was steadily getting closer to the illumination now, sitting perhaps 3 cabins away. It was still occupying the exact same position, locked directly above that specific passenger cabin, completely motionless, not swaying, exactly as if it were anchored to something entirely invisible in the air. Callum. Marcus's voice crackled back through the radio. I am not seeing anything on the cameras. What sector are you currently in? I'm positioned between pylons 1 and 2. I quickly checked my tablet. I'm roughly 40% of the way up. Hold on. I continued to watch the light. Now that I was significantly closer, I could clearly perceive it had a very faint pulse to it. It wasn't an aggressive strobe effect, but more like biological breathing, as if the entity were literally inhaling and exhaling light. Yeah, man. I'm not seeing anything at all, Marcus confirmed. The cameras display the normal line. Where exactly is this light located? It is right in front of me, directly above cabin 18. Absolute silence on the radio channel. Then, dude, are you feeling okay up there? Do you need me to call somebody? I'm fine. I am looking right at the damn thing. Callum, the security cameras show absolutely nothing. Maybe you're just seeing a bizarre reflection or something. I was a mere 2 cabins away now. The glowing sphere was easily 6 feet in diameter, quite possibly bigger. It was undeniably, absolutely there. How could the high-definition cameras completely miss it? Forget it, I snapped. I will check it out myself. I heard Marcus say something else over the speaker, but I had already placed the radio down. My maintenance cabin was steadily pulling up alongside cabin 18 now, granting me a completely clear view. That is exactly when I noticed something that caused my throat to violently tighten. The brilliant light hovering above cabin 18 wasn't the only one. There were 3 more of them. One suspended above cabin 22, another over cabin 25, and a final one positioned above cabin 29. All of them were flawless, identical clones. They all radiated that same piercing blue-white light. They all hovered exactly 30 feet directly above their respective cabins. And they were all perfectly, impossibly still, despite the mountain wind that was now escalating, causing my own cabin to sway noticeably against its steel cable. I pressed my face against the chilled window pane. Those lights were absolutely not tethered to anything. There were 0 wires, 0 support beams, 0 drones involved. They were merely existing there, effortlessly floating and pulsating with a soft rhythm. And that is when the second horrifying detail caught my attention. The 4 passenger cabins suspended directly beneath these anomalies were coated in frost across their glass. However, it wasn't standard, environmental frost. It wasn't that thin, crystalline dusting you naturally anticipate from sub-zero temperatures. This was an incredibly dense, completely opaque layer of ice that utterly swallowed every single window pane. And the most terrifying part? It was forming strictly on the inside. I had been operating this exact lift for 6 years. I have witnessed frost accumulate on gondola glass countless times, but basic physics dictates it forms on the exterior where the freezing air actively strikes the material. You simply do not get interior frost accumulation unless there is a significant source of warm moisture trapped inside the sealed cabin. And every single one of these passenger units had been entirely vacant since the resort locked its gates over 3 hours prior. My maintenance unit slowly glided past cabin 18. I violently twisted around in my seat, keeping my eyes locked on the anomaly through the rear-facing window. The brilliant sphere maintained its flawless, stationary hover, completely frozen in its coordinate even as my cabin carried me further away. I frantically snatched my radio off my belt once more. "Marcus, I need you to execute a massive favor for me." "What is it?" "Contact Ava. I don't care if you have to physically wake her up. Tell her she needs to meticulously review the master security footage from tonight. Specifically, the primary gondola line. I urgently need to confirm if any unauthorized personnel accessed any of these cabins after the resort officially closed. Man, it is practically 1 o'clock in the morning. She is literally going to murder me. Just make the call, please." Ava Riker served as the supreme head of resort security, and she absolutely did not tolerate nonsense. If a trespasser had somehow managed to breach those suspended cabins after hours, although my brain completely failed to process how or why someone would attempt such a stunt, she would definitely uncover the truth. I finally reached the platform for Pylon 2 and engaged the brakes to halt my cabin for the mandated inspection. My hands were violently trembling as I stepped out onto the freezing metal grating, and I knew for a fact it had nothing to do with the winter cold. I executed the hardware check with frantic speed, barely even glancing at the heavy equipment. My only objective was to finalize the protocol so I could resume my ascent and hopefully secure a superior vantage point on those impossible spheres. However, the exact second I scrambled back inside my maintenance cabin and threw my gaze back down the length of the steel cable, the glowing entities were entirely gone. All 4 of them simply vanished. It was exactly as if an unseen hand had violently flipped a master breaker switch. I stood paralyzed, staring blankly at the vacant airspace where they had just been hovering, my breathing reduced to rapid, shallow gasps. The empty passenger cabins were undeniably still suspended there, naturally swaying gently against their cables, but the suffocating interior frost coating their windows had completely evaporated as well. Relying purely on the faint, ambient light bleeding up from the base village far below, I could clearly verify that every single pane of glass was perfectly transparent once again. My tactical radio suddenly crackled. "Callum, this is Ava." I lunged for the receiver. "Yeah, I'm right here. Marcus informed me that you urgently requested a comprehensive footage review." "Yes, a complete sweep of the gondola line spanning from roughly 9 p.m. right up to now. I desperately need to verify if any individual breached cabins 18, 22, 25, or 29. Why exactly? What the hell is going on up there?" I hesitated, my mind spinning. How on earth was I supposed to accurately articulate the nightmare I had just witnessed? I discovered some highly specific irregularities. I merely need to cross-reference a detail. "Callum, it is literally 1 o'clock in the morning." "I am fully aware. I genuinely apologize, but this is incredibly important." I heard her release a heavy, frustrated sigh. "Fine. Grant me 20 minutes. I will call you back." I re-engaged the drive system and continued my lonely ascent toward Pylon 3, which marked the absolute highest elevation point on the entire line. The massive summit station rested just a quarter of a mile beyond it. For the entire duration of the climb, I obsessively scanned the pitch-black sky and heavily scrutinized the empty cabins dangling below me, desperate for any returning sign of those brilliant lights. Absolutely nothing. When I finally docked at Pylon 3, I executed my mechanical inspection completely on autopilot. My brain was endlessly replaying the impossible data over and over. The blinding lights, The sudden interior frost. The terrifying reality that the high-definition security cameras had failed to pick up anything. My radio sprang to life again. "Callum, it's Ava." I meticulously reviewed the footage, and there is absolutely zero activity. Not a single soul accessed any of those cabins after the final closure protocols. The entire line remained completely dead from 9 p.m. straight through until you initiated your maintenance sweep. Why did you request this? What exactly did you see? I opened my mouth to confess, then immediately clamped it shut. What sane explanation could I possibly offer? That I had spent the last 20 minutes observing physics-defying, glowing lights floating above empty cabins? That impossible layers of frost had violently manifested and subsequently vanished from the inside of sealed windows? "Callum, are you still there?" "Yeah, I'm here." Never mind. I must have just been seeing things playing tricks in the dark. "I am genuinely sorry I woke you." "Are you absolutely certain? Because if we are dealing with a legitimate safety issue." "Negative, there is zero safety issue. Everything is operating perfectly fine." "Sorry again." I swiftly terminated the connection before she could launch into further questions. I finalized my hardware check at Pylon 3 and pushed the maintenance cabin toward the final summit station. The high-altitude winds were significantly more aggressive up here, hitting roughly 30 miles per hour in heavy gusts and causing my small cabin to sway much more dramatically. The ambient temperature had brutally plummeted to 15 degrees. When I finally docked at the summit platform and stepped out, the sheer, crushing silence impacted me like a physical blow. Operating at this extreme altitude, amidst heavy gusts, you inherently expect to hear the wind violently howling through the jagged peaks and whistling through the heavy steel cables. Instead, it was dead quiet. Not just silent. I could still perceive the faint, mechanical hum of the gondola machinery, the ragged sound of my own respiration, and the heavy creak of my boots grinding against the metal grating. But there was something fundamentally broken about the sound. It was heavily muted, acting exactly as if an unseen entity had violently dialed down the master volume of the entire world. I finished my checks with frantic speed, eager to begin my descent. But the exact second I pivoted to climb back into my cabin, I finally saw it. Another light. This specific one was vastly different. It was massive. Much, much bigger. It was locked in a dead hover directly above the roof of the summit station itself, positioned perhaps 100 feet up in the air. It radiated that exact same piercing blue-white color, but instead of manifesting as a sphere, this object was heavily elongated, cigar-shaped, and it was significantly larger than any of the lights I had witnessed earlier. I estimated it to be easily 40 feet in length, quite possibly larger. I stood entirely paralyzed on the metal platform, stranded 11,000 feet above sea level, staring helplessly up at a colossal structure that fundamentally shouldn't exist. The aggressive mountain wind had entirely ceased now. It didn't gradually die down, it completely stopped, exactly like someone had yanked the power cord on a massive fan. The massive light pulsed gently. Once, twice, 3 deliberate times. And that is when the sensation hit me. You know that primal, deeply unsettling feeling you get when you inherently know someone is staring at you? That cold prickle creeping up the back of your neck. That absolute certainty that unseen eyes are completely locked onto your position, even though you can't spot anyone? Take that exact feeling and multiply it by 1,000. It wasn't merely the sensation of being casually observed. It was the crushing, suffocating feeling of being clinically examined, studied, like I was a microscopic bug pinned beneath a lens, and something vast and utterly incomprehensible was staring down at me, meticulously taking notes. Every single fiber of my being wanted to move. Wanted to sprint to my cabin. Wanted to get the hell off this cursed mountain. But my legs completely refused to work. I just stood there frozen, helplessly watching the massive light pulse directly above me. Exactly how long did I stand there paralyzed? I honestly don't know. It could have been seconds. It could have been minutes. The very concept of time felt incredibly strange, highly elastic, as if the seconds were simultaneously stretching and compressing at the exact same moment. Then, completely without warning, it was over. The massive light shot straight up into the black sky so incredibly fast I almost didn't even see it move. 1 microsecond it was dominating the airspace, and in the next, it was completely gone. It left behind nothing but a rapidly fading, blue-white streak burned against the blanket of stars. The violent mountain winds instantly slammed back into existence all at once, hitting me with such ferocity that it nearly knocked me off my feet. I violently stumbled toward my maintenance cabin and practically fell inside, aggressively slamming the heavy door shut behind me. My hands were convulsing so badly I could barely maintain a grip on my tactical radio. Base. Base. This is Callum. Pure static. Marcus, do you copy my transmission? Absolute nothingness. I frantically checked the hardware. The unit was powered on. The battery indicator displayed a full charge. Yet, all I received was a wall of dead static. I instantly engaged the drive system, launching the cabin back down the mountain. My only coherent thought was getting off this lift. I desperately wanted to be back on solid ground. I wanted to be literally anywhere but here. As I rapidly descended, gliding past the endless line of empty passenger cabins swaying violently in the wind, I noticed something that caused my stomach to completely drop out. Every single cabin I passed featured massive, opaque frost completely consuming the inside of its windows. It wasn't restricted to the 4 specific units from earlier. It was every single one of them. All 42 enclosed cabins hanging on the line were entirely blinded by thick, opaque frost covering their windows from the inside. I completely ignored the mandated secondary inspections at the pylons on the way down. I didn't stop a single time. I just needed to reach the bottom. When my cabin finally violently docked at the base station at 1:47 a.m., Marcus was already standing on the platform waiting for me, his face twisted into a mask of complete confusion. "Dude, where have you been?" he demanded. "You were officially supposed to radio in your status 20 minutes ago." I stepped out of the maintenance cabin on shaking legs. "What exactly are you talking about? I've just been doing my regular rounds." He held up his smartphone to my face. "Callum, you officially started your ascent at 12:15. It is now almost 2 o'clock in the morning. A full top-to-bottom run takes you an hour, max. Where the hell were you for the extra 35 minutes? I stared blankly at his phone's time display. 1:47 a.m. I had lost 35 minutes. I possessed absolutely no memory of where that chunk of time had vanished. One moment, I was standing completely paralyzed on the summit platform, helplessly watching that massive cigar-shaped light disappear into the night sky. The very next moment, I was descending the mountain. But according to the cold, hard numbers on the clock, more than half an hour had passed during what subjectively felt like mere seconds. I honestly don't know," I stammered. Marcus was openly looking at me with genuine concern now. "Are you feeling okay, man? You look incredibly pale." "I'm fine. I really need to go home." "What about the frost inside the cabins? You still need to document that for the logs, right?" I slowly turned to look back up the gondola line. The long row of passenger cabins hung silently in the dark, their glass windows completely clear and casually reflecting the bright lights from the base station. There was absolutely no frost. "There's no frost," I said quietly. "Yeah, that's exactly what I've been saying. Are you seriously okay to drive? Do you want me to call someone for you?" I gave my head a tight shake. "No, I'm perfectly fine. Just incredibly tired." I left Marcus standing at the base station and slowly walked toward my truck parked in the employee lot. My hands were still violently trembling as I unlocked the door and climbed inside the freezing cab. I remained sitting there for a very long time, the engine rumbling and the heater blasting at maximum capacity, desperately trying to make some kind of logical sense of what had just happened. The impossible lights, the suffocating interior frost, the massive gap of missing time, and that terrifying, primal feeling of being clinically studied. I didn't tell a single soul about it. What could I even say? That I had witnessed a fleet of UFOs hovering directly over the resort's gondola line? That I had inexplicably lost half an hour of my life with absolutely zero memory to account for it? But I knew deep in my bones what I had seen. And I knew something else, too. This nightmare absolutely wasn't over. Because as I was carefully driving my truck down the winding mountain access road, I chanced to look into my rearview mirror and spotted it one final time. A small, piercing blue-white light, suspended in a perfect hover directly above the summit. Quietly watching. Ava Riker didn't sleep very well after taking Callum's late-night call. She had served as the head of security at Copper Ridge for 8 solid years, and she had learned long ago to implicitly trust her gut instincts. Something buried deep within Callum's voice had been undeniably off. He wasn't drunk, he wasn't high. It just sounded fundamentally wrong, exactly like a man who had witnessed something that had profoundly shaken him. She arrived at the resort at 6 a.m., 2 full hours ahead of her scheduled day shift. The sky above was still pitch dark, the stars only just beginning to fade as the dawn slowly approached. She badged her way into the main security office and immediately pulled up the master footage from the previous night. Marcus had already clocked out and headed home, replaced by the standard day shift guard, Tommy. He glanced up from his steaming coffee when she walked through the door. "You're here awfully early." "Couldn't sleep," she replied, choosing not to elaborate. She took a seat at the primary monitoring station and aggressively pulled up the exterior camera networks, zeroing in specifically on the lenses covering the gondola line. She initiated the playback starting at 9 p.m., the exact moment the resort officially closed to the public. The digital footage displayed exactly what she had reported back to Callum. The final straggling passengers exiting their cabins, the ultimate sweep conducted by the closing crew, and the massive gondola system finally shutting down for the night. She fast-forwarded the timeline to midnight, precisely when Callum's shift kicked off. She watched the digital timestamp as he entered his designated maintenance cabin and commenced his slow ascent. The security cameras faithfully tracked his steady progress up the mountain, monitoring him cabin by cabin, pylon by pylon. Absolutely nothing unusual appeared on the screens. No phantom lights, zero internal frost, just Callum executing his standard rounds. She meticulously checked the digital timestamps. He successfully reached pylon 1 at 12:23. He reached pylon 2 at 12:48. Thus far, everything was perfectly, boringly normal. Then, a glaring anomaly caught her eye. Right at pylon 3, a massive gap suddenly manifested in the footage. It wasn't digital static, nor was it file corruption. It was simply a violent, inexplicable gap. One moment the digital timestamp clearly read 1:11 and 22 seconds a.m., and in the very next frame, it abruptly jumped to 1:47 and 9 seconds a.m. Exactly 35 minutes and 47 seconds of recorded footage was entirely missing. She sat up significantly straighter in her chair. Security camera glitches certainly weren't uncommon during the brutal winter months. The sub-zero cold could play absolute hell with the exterior equipment, but she had never, in her entire career, seen a gap this surgically clean. Usually, a failure would result in heavy static, pixelation, or some form of visual distortion. This looked exactly as if someone had simply logged into the server and cleanly deleted 35 minutes of video. She immediately checked the other high-altitude cameras covering the upper mountain. The exact same result. Every single one of them displayed the identical chronological gap at the exact same timestamp. "Tommy, get over here and look at this." He strolled over, casually holding his coffee mug. "What's up? Do you see this timestamp?" She pointed a finger at the screen. "We are currently missing 35 minutes of footage from all the upper mountain cameras." He leaned in, squinting. "Ha! That is definitely weird. Do you want me to file a formal maintenance request?" "Yeah. And I want you to pull the physical backup drives from last night immediately. I need to see if the raw footage is still archived there." While Tommy headed out to retrieve the backup drives, Ava kept her eyes glued to the playback. The visual footage picked up again at exactly 1:47 a.m., clearly showing Callum's maintenance cabin rapidly descending from the summit. She could catch brief glimpses of him through the cabin window, and even rendered in the grainy green night vision filter, he looked undeniably shaken. When Tommy returned, the backup drives revealed the exact same horrifying gap. Whatever unknown issue had caused the missing footage had simultaneously affected both the primary main system and the isolated backup servers. Ava sat back heavily, her mind racing. An electronic glitch possessing the capability to flawlessly wipe multiple, redundant systems simultaneously? It was theoretically possible, but highly unlikely. And when combined directly with Callum's incredibly odd behavior, her phone suddenly rang. It was David Smith, one of the veteran snowcat drivers. "Hey, Ava, do you have a minute?" "What's up, David?" "I'm currently up on the summit run doing my morning grooming passes, and I really think you should come up here and see this in person." "See what, exactly?" "Just come up. I'm parked right at the top of Summit Run, sitting near the gondola summit station." Ava immediately grabbed her winter jacket. "I'll be there in 20. She commandeered one of the mountain patrol snowmobiles and aggressively headed up the slope. The morning sun was just breaking over the jagged eastern peaks, painting the fresh snow in brilliant shades of pink and gold. It was a beautiful morning, boasting absolutely perfect conditions. But Ava couldn't shake the suffocating feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. She easily found David's massive snowcat parked near the summit station structure, its heavy grooming blade fully raised. David was standing outside in the cold, staring intently at the ground. "What exactly am I looking at?" Ava asked as she killed the engine and pulled up next to him. David simply pointed a gloved finger. The pristine snow completely surrounding the summit station was violently marked with strange indentations. They were absolutely not human footprints. These impressions were perfectly circular, roughly 2 feet in diameter, and were pressed incredibly deep into the powder. There were exactly 9 of them in total, meticulously arranged into a flawless, perfect triangle. Every single impression was exactly the same size and the exact same depth. "What the hell is this?" Ava whispered, dropping to her knees right next to one of the indentations. The powder trapped inside the deep circular impression was aggressively compressed, packed so incredibly tightly that it had essentially transformed into solid ice. The inner edges were terrifyingly clean and surgically precise. "When exactly did you discover these?" she asked. "About 15 minutes ago. I was initiating my very first pass down the summit run and spotted them immediately. I guarantee you they weren't here yesterday evening. I personally groomed this exact area at 7 p.m. last night, and the snow was completely untouched. Could it potentially be from some heavy equipment? Maybe the maintenance crew was dragging something up here." David vehemently shook his head. "I already radioed maintenance. Nobody has been up at this elevation except for Callum, and he explicitly doesn't get out of the gondola cabin during his runs. Besides that, just look at the geometric pattern. What conceivable piece of resort equipment leaves behind marks like this?" Ava slowly walked the exterior perimeter of the massive triangle. The deep circular marks were spaced exactly 12 feet apart from one another, forming a perfectly flawless equilateral triangle. Positioned dead center within the triangle's boundaries, the snow exhibited undeniable signs of extreme thermal exposure. The top layer of powder had been violently melted and subsequently refrozen, producing a heavily crusted, icy surface. "Did you happen to take any photos of this?" she asked. "That was the first thing I did." David pulled out his smartphone and angled the screen toward her. "I already sent the files to you." Ava quickly checked her own phone. The high-resolution photos displayed the bizarre marks clearly, but there was something else. Captured in the specific photograph taken from directly above the triangle, there was a highly distinct, faint discoloration staining the snow trapped entirely within the geometric boundaries. It manifested as a massive circular patch, maybe 30 feet across, where the white snow looked fundamentally different, significantly darker. "What on earth is that?" Ava muttered, zooming in aggressively on the photo. "I honestly don't know. It is virtually invisible when you're standing right here at ground level." I only noticed the shadow when I swiped through the captured photos. It loosely resembles some kind of massive shadow, but there is absolutely nothing suspended above us to project it. Ava felt a distinct, icy chill radiate through her body that had nothing to do with the sub-zero temperature. David, I urgently need you to do something for me. Do not groom your blade over these markings. I need you to completely rope off this entire perimeter. If anyone inquires, simply inform them that security is actively investigating a potential safety concern. What specific kind of safety concern? What specific kind of safety concern? I'll be sure to let you know the exact second I figure it out myself. Upon returning to the base security office, Ava dedicated the subsequent hour to aggressively dissecting every single scrap of video footage archived from the previous night. She intentionally expanded her search parameters vastly beyond the primary gondola line, systematically checking optical arrays stationed across the entire sprawling resort. At exactly 1:11 a.m., every single camera mounted on the upper mountain went completely dark. It wasn't merely the optics focused on the gondola. It was all of them. The Summit Lodge cameras, the chairlift feeds, the upper parking lot security loops, literally any piece of visual recording hardware positioned above the 8,000-foot elevation line. And every single one of them violently snapped back online at the exact same timestamp, 1:47 a.m. Tommy strolled back into the office clutching a fresh pot of coffee. Having any luck in there? I guess that heavily depends on your definition of luck. Ava tapped the screen, highlighting the pattern. Look at this. 35 minutes and 47 seconds. Every single upper elevation camera. The exact same chronological gap. That absolutely has to be a centralized power grid issue, right? Maybe a primary transformer blew a fuse. Run a diagnostic on the electrical power logs. Tommy quickly booted up the resort's massive electrical monitoring system. The power grid was completely steady the entire night. 0 voltage fluctuations. 0 localized outages. So, you are telling me the cameras successfully lost their visual footage, but miraculously did not lose their physical power supply. Apparently. Ava aggressively pulled up the resort's historical maintenance archives. Has any technician formally reported any systemic issues with these specific camera arrays in the past? Tommy verified the digital records. Nothing recent. The last formal hardware maintenance sweep was executed back in November. Everything checked out perfectly. Ava slouched back heavily in her chair, staring blankly at the glowing monitors. Severely missing footage. Highly disturbing, geometric marks branded into the summit powder. Callum's incredibly erratic, traumatized behavior. Every single variable aggressively pointed toward something massive, yet she couldn't piece together exactly what that something was. Her phone suddenly buzzed against the desk. A text message from Callum. Can we talk off-site? She quickly typed out a reply. Copper Kettle. 30 minutes. See you there. The Copper Kettle was a local, rustic coffee shop situated in the neighboring town of Silverthorne, positioned roughly a 15-minute drive from the ski resort. Ava located Callum hunched in a heavily shadowed corner booth, looking exactly like a man who hadn't slept a single wink. A completely untouched mug of black coffee rested on the table in front of him. She quietly slid into the booth directly across from his position. Okay. Talk. Callum nervously swept his eyes around the establishment, ensuring absolutely no one was sitting within earshot. What I am preparing to tell you is going to sound completely insane. Try me. He systematically unpacked the entire nightmare. The blinding lights hovering directly above the empty cabins. The suffocating, impossible frost materializing strictly on the interior of the sealed glass. The colossal, cigar-shaped intelligence suspended in a dead hover directly above the summit station. That horrifying, primal sensation of being clinically examined. And finally, the massive void of missing time. When he finally finished his testimony, Ava sat in absolute silence for an incredibly long moment. You think I'm crazy, don't you? Callum whispered. No. Ava slowly retrieved her smartphone and pulled up the high-resolution photographs detailing the impossible, circular indentations scorched into the summit powder. I think something highly significant happened up there last night. Callum stared blankly at the photos. What exactly are those? That is precisely what I was hoping you could tell me. They were discovered right at the summit station. Located exactly where you said you saw that massive light. I've never seen marks like that before in my life. Neither have I. Ava locked her phone screen and slipped it away. Callum, I need you to verbally tell me again exactly what you saw. Every single detail. Don't leave anything out. He agonizingly went through the narrative a second time, significantly slower now. Ava took aggressive notes, asking highly specific questions, clarifying microscopic details, the estimated size of the lights, their exact color temperature, the bitter cold, the abrupt death of the mountain wind, that suffocating feeling of being studied. When he finally reached the section detailing his missing time, she threw up a hand to stop him. You specifically mentioned that you felt time stretching out, like it was highly elastic. Yeah, it's incredibly hard to explain. It was like, you know when you're hovering right on the edge of falling asleep, and you completely lose track of time, but you're not actually asleep? It operated exactly like that, except I was standing perfectly upright, fully conscious. Ava rhythmically tapped her pen against her notebook. The security cameras went completely dark for exactly 35 minutes and 47 seconds. That is the exact same duration as your missing time. Callum's face instantly went pale. What? She showed him the transcribed footage logs. Every single camera positioned above 8,000 feet went totally dark for nearly 36 minutes. It is the exact identical time period that you cannot account for. So, I'm definitively not crazy. I don't think so. I firmly believe that an event transpired up on that summit that we are entirely incapable of explaining utilizing conventional means. Are you saying that? I am not saying anything concrete just yet, but I am absolutely going to aggressively investigate this. She forcefully snapped her notebook shut. I require you to do a massive favor for me. Are you capable of working your shift tonight? What? I literally just told you. I fully understand. But if this anomaly decides to manifest again, I urgently need an operative up on that ridge who intimately knows exactly what to look for. And I promise you, I will be actively monitoring every single variable from down in the security hub. We will maintain an open radio contact the whole time. If anything remotely weird begins to occur, you document it, and you come straight back down. Deal? Callum looked exactly like a man who wanted to vehemently refuse, but he eventually offered a tight nod. Okay. But if I catch sight of those lights again, I am absolutely not sticking around to study them. Fair enough. Ava dedicated the rest of her day to ruthlessly reviewing every single piece of footage she could find from the past month. She was desperately searching for patterns, literally anything unusual that might have served as a precursor to the previous night's event. She successfully found 3 incidents. On January 23rd, the gondola system had triggered an automatic emergency shutdown at exactly 2:17 a.m. The digital maintenance logs displayed no mechanical reason for the abrupt halt. It just simply stopped. The night maintenance operator, a guy named Rick Lawson, had filed the formal report but couldn't diagnose any physical issues. The massive system inexplicably restarted itself exactly 10 minutes later. On February 3rd, every single electrical light fixture inside the summit lodge had violently flickered in perfect synchronization at exactly 1:30 a.m., despite the fact that the building zones were hardwired onto entirely independent circuits. The patrolling security guard on duty had reported it, but the subsequent electrical inspection found absolutely nothing wrong. On February 9th, 2 night shift snowcat drivers had formally reported encountering what they described as weird lights dancing across the north face of the mountain. They had simply assumed it was trespassing snowmobilers running high-intensity headlamps. However, when the security team physically swept the grid, they discovered absolutely 0 snowmobile tracks scarring that specific terrain. 3 highly anomalous incidents, all manifesting during the night. all triggering strictly between 1 o'clock and 2:30 in the morning. And significantly, all occurring on specific nights when Callum was absolutely not working. Ava rapidly pulled up the employee staffing schedules. Callum had undeniably been off duty during those exact 3 nights. One happened to fall on his standard scheduled day off. The other 2 occurrences aligned with nights he had formerly called in sick battling the flu. So whatever unknown phenomenon was actively occupying their airspace, it had been relentlessly operating for at least a solid month. But last night was the very first occasion where someone had been physically positioned up there to witness the nightmare directly. At 11 p.m., Ava returned to the main security hub. A lineup of 3 heavily insulated thermoses filled with black coffee sat arranged on the desk directly in front of her. Tommy had already clocked out and headed home, and she had explicitly instructed the remaining night guard to conduct his perimeter rounds strictly on foot, ensuring she was left completely isolated with the surveillance monitors. At precisely 11:53 p.m., Callum's voice crackled over the radio from the base station. "Ava, are you on the channel? I am right here. Ready whenever you are. I am initiating my ascent right now. Do you have the recording protocols engaged? I am capturing every single camera and every possible angle. I have also actively engaged the infrared optics." Infrared. If there is genuinely an entity hovering up there, it might register on the thermal spectrum. It's absolutely worth a shot. All right, here we go. Ava kept her eyes glued to the glowing screens as Callum's small maintenance cabin commenced its vertical climb. This time around, she had routed every available camera feed onto the massive primary monitor wall. Standard visual feeds, infrared optics, and low-light enhancement arrays were all running simultaneously. If anything bizarre decided to manifest, she was guaranteed to spot it. Callum successfully arrived at Pylon 1 without a single incident. Everything looks completely clear down here. Moving on. Copy that. The subsequent 15 minutes played out with mundane routine. Callum steadily progressed up the steel line, checking in over the radio at standard intervals. Everything remained perfectly normal. Then, right at 12:41 a.m., Ava finally caught it. On the dedicated infrared feed, a distinct thermal signature materialized directly above cabin 21. It wasn't particularly massive, roughly the circumference of a standard beach ball, but it burned a brilliant white on the thermal display, strongly indicating a source of extreme heat. "Callum, halt your cabin immediately." "What? For what reason?" "Just stop the drive system right now." She could audibly detect the mechanical whine of the massive gondola system decelerating through the radio link. "All right, I'm fully stopped. What exactly is going on? Direct your attention forward. Focus on cabin 21. Are you getting a visual on anything?" A tense pause followed. "Negative. Am I supposed to be seeing something?" Ava glared intently at the infrared display. The intense heat signature was parked right there, as clear as day. However, on the standard optical camera, there was absolutely empty space. "Switch over to your thermoscope. You packed it with your gear, correct?" "Yeah. Give me a second." She heard the rustling of thick fabric over the mic. "Okay. I'm looking directly through the lens now." "Holy. You possess a visual?" "Yeah, I see it. Ava, there is definitely something suspended up here. It's incredibly hot. But my naked eyes literally cannot perceive it. Can you describe its shape?" "It's perfectly spherical. Roughly 3 feet in diameter. It is just effortlessly floating in the airspace directly over the cabin. It possesses zero movement. It is just existing there." Ava ensured all recording systems were capturing the event. "Does it appear identical to the anomalies you encountered yesterday evening?" "I honestly have no idea. Last night, I could clearly view them without any specialized optics. This thing is strictly visible on the thermal band, yet it radiates that exact same wrong energy." As they both monitored the entity, the thermal signature gently pulsed once, flaring with increased intensity for a brief second before settling back down to its baseline temperature. "Callum, I need you to cautiously proceed forward. Slowly close the distance. However, if any variable alters, or if you feel remotely threatened, you are to instantly reverse the drive and come back down. Are you completely insane? You want me to actively move closer to that thing? I require higher quality optical footage. The shorter the distance, the more refined the camera details will be. She could hear his heavy, ragged breathing echoing over the radio transmission. Okay, I am engaging the drive. The maintenance unit crept forward at an agonizing crawl. The intense heat signature maintained its flawless, stationary hover. Ava analyzed the infrared stream with laser focus, absorbing every microscopic detail. The geometry was a flawless sphere. The thermal output was perfectly distributed across its entire exterior shell, and it was burning hot. The digital scale registered temperatures exceeding 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Callum's maintenance cabin eventually pulled up directly adjacent to cabin 21. Ava, the glass. Look closely at the windows. She rapidly toggled the feed back to the standard visual camera and instantly felt her stomach plummet. The interior windows of cabin 21 were aggressively fogging up, perfectly mirroring Callum's terrifying description from the previous night. It was an incredibly dense layer of condensation that was rapidly solidifying into opaque frost. I have a visual on it, she confirmed. Keep your optical lens locked onto the target. There's another entity, Callum announced, his vocal cords stretched tight. 2 cabins further up the line, and yet another one positioned just past that. Ava frantically checked the infrared wall. He was entirely correct. Fresh thermal signatures were actively popping into existence. Every single one assumed to hover directly above a vacant passenger cabin. What is your total count? She demanded. 5. Wait. No, 6 total. They are aligned perfectly in a row. Are they exhibiting any movement? Negative, they are merely hovering in place. But, Ava, I am starting to experience that horrible sensation again. That suffocating feeling like I'm being clinically studied. Copy that. I need you to immediately. The digital feeds violently snapped to black. Every single one of them. Standard optics, thermal infrared, low light enhancement, the entire massive wall of monitors instantly transformed into a sea of dead screens. Callum, do you receive my transmission? Heavy static. Callum, report your status. Absolute nothingness. Ava snatched up her tactical radio and violently cranked the dial over to the resort-wide emergency broadcast channel. This is Ava Riker, head of security. I require immediate tactical assistance down at the primary gondola base station. I need any active patrol units in the sector to respond immediately. A harsh crackle of white noise was followed by a voice. This is Patrol 3. We are roughly 5 minutes out from your location. What exactly is the situation? I have suffered a total loss of contact with an active maintenance operator currently suspended on the gondola line. I need you to rendezvous with me at the base station on the double. Copy that. We are en route. Ava was already in a dead sprint. She violently threw open the security office doors and charged across the freezing plaza, making a beeline for the gondola base terminal. For the entire duration of the sprint, she endlessly attempted to hail Callum over the radio frequency. She received nothing but an unrelenting wall of static. She hit the base station platform at the exact same moment the patrol snowmobile roared into the loading zone. 2 uniformed security officers, Jake and Melissa, quickly dismounted the machine and rushed over. What exactly is going down? Jake demanded. I have entirely lost comms with Callum Rafferty. He was in the middle of executing a high-altitude maintenance sweep, and every single optical camera covering the mountain just went totally dark. I have to get up to that elevation. You absolutely cannot utilize a gondola cabin while the master system is actively running, Melissa argued. It is an extreme safety hazard. Then kill the master drive system and we will run the snowmobiles directly up the maintenance trail. That specific access road doesn't extend all the way up to the summit station, Jake countered. It physically terminates right at Pylon 2. Then we push the machines as far as the terrain allows, and we hike the remainder of the distance. Ava, that equates to a grueling 2-mile vertical hike through deep powder in the pitch black at a 10,000-foot elevation. That will literally consume hours. Then we had better initiate the climb right this second. Jake traded a deeply concerned look with Melissa before locking his eyes back onto Ava. What, specifically, did you witness up on those camera feeds? Before Ava possessed the opportunity to formulate an answer, the heavy floodlights illuminating the base station began to violently flicker. They strobed once, twice, and then completely died, drowning the entire loading platform in total darkness. The emergency backup lighting engaged a few agonizing seconds later, washing the surrounding area in a dim, eerie red glow. However, the massive gondola drive system had completely stalled. The heavy cabins were left hanging completely motionless against their steel tethers, swaying faintly in the mountain breeze. What in the hell? Melissa muttered, staring blankly at the primary control console. The master breaker just completely tripped. Then reset the damn thing, Ava ordered. Melissa reached out and forcefully flipped the heavy breaker switch. Absolutely zero response. She attempted to engage it a second time. The system refuses to reset. It behaves exactly as if a massive physical obstruction is blocking the primary circuit. Suddenly, Ava's tactical radio hissed to life. Ava, are you on the channel? Callum, where exactly are you positioned? Are you physically all right? I am. I honestly have no idea. I am still locked inside my maintenance cabin. But Ava, something is incredibly wrong up here. I literally cannot see a single thing. It is completely dark. I mean, absolute, suffocating darkness. It is so pitch black, I cannot even perceive my own hand hovering an inch from my face. The power grid is completely dead down at the base. The entire master system has suffered a catastrophic shutdown. Are you harboring any injuries? Negative, I am unhurt. But the exterior lights illuminating the pylons up here were fully operational a split second ago, and then, it felt exactly like an unseen hand reached up and literally switched off the sun. I have been trapped in some incredibly dark environments before, but this is a completely different animal. This feels fundamentally wrong. Ava could vividly hear the raw, unadulterated panic bleeding through his vocal cords. All right, listen to my voice very carefully. You are to remain securely inside that cabin. Do you currently have your heavy-duty flashlight on your person? Yeah, I do. But the hardware is entirely unresponsive. What exactly do you mean it is unresponsive? I mean I am aggressively mashing the power button and literally nothing is occurring. I installed brand new batteries right before my shift initiated, but the device is completely, totally dead. Ava snapped her gaze toward Jake and Melissa. Test your personal flashlights immediately. Both security officers smoothly unholstered their heavy maglights and engaged the switches. Absolute nothingness. Jake aggressively smacked his flashlight against the palm of his heavy glove. Completely dead. How is it physically possible that every single one of our flashlights is simultaneously dead? The dim red emergency bulbs illuminating the base station began to heavily flicker. Something is actively siphoning the electrical power, Melissa whispered in horror. Something massive is draining the entire grid. Ava slowly tilted her head back, staring up the length of the gondola line toward the pitch-black cabins violently swaying against the wind. Somewhere incredibly high up in that freezing void, Callum was trapped inside a metal box, completely engulfed by a darkness they could not even begin to comprehend. And all around them, the crimson emergency lights were rapidly beginning to fade into nothingness. The darkness was becoming absolute. Callum had been in dark places before. Deep caves, sealed rooms, the kind of absolute dark where you genuinely can't see your own hand in front of your face. But this was different. This wasn't merely the absence of light. This was something thicker, heavier, exactly as if the darkness itself possessed physical substance. He sat paralyzed in his maintenance cabin, suspended 11,000 feet above sea level, and felt the blackness aggressively pressing against him from all sides. His heavy-duty flashlight was dead. His phone was dead. Even the emergency glow strips on the cabin walls, the kind strictly engineered to glow for years without power, were entirely dark. But he could absolutely still feel them. The lights, or whatever they actually were. They were all around him now, pressing incredibly close. He couldn't visually see them, but he could feel their terrifying presence just as surely as he could feel the freezing air biting his face. It was that exact same primal sensation of being watched, of being clinically studied. His tactical radio violently crackled with static. Ava's voice bled through, heavily distorted but undeniably recognizable. "Callum, hold on. Coming. Ava, I don't know if you can hear me, but there is something up here. Multiple somethings. They're swarming all around my cabin." The aggressive static intensified, completely drowning out any response. And then, he physically felt the cabin move. It wasn't the normal, rhythmic swaying motion generated by the wind or the steel cable. This was fundamentally different. The massive cabin was being hoisted, violently pulled straight upward off its normal track, steadily rising through the suffocating darkness. Callum Death gripped the handrails, his heart frantically hammering against his ribs. "What the hell, Ava? The cabin is actively moving. I'm definitely not on the cable anymore." No response, just a wall of static. The maintenance cabin continued to rise. Callum pressed his face against the freezing glass, desperately trying to see anything, but there was only that impossibly thick, absolute darkness. Exactly how high was he going? Where was he being taken? Then, incredibly slowly, light began to seep into the space. Not originating from any visible fixture, the light just was. It initiated as a faint, ethereal blue-white glow, so incredibly dim that Callum almost thought he was imagining it. But it grew steadily brighter, fully illuminating the interior of his cabin in that exact same cold, clinical light he'd witnessed the night before. He could clearly see his own hands now, gripping the metal handrails. He could see his ragged breath rapidly fogging in the air. He could clearly see the thick frost aggressively forming on the inside of the cabin windows, perfectly mimicking the passenger cabins from earlier. The cabin's impossible ascent finally stopped. Callum peered out the frosted window and felt his mind violently struggle to process what he was seeing. He was physically inside something. The structural walls surrounding him weren't solid walls. They were more akin to biological membranes, heavily translucent and faintly luminous, sprawling endlessly in all directions. He could vaguely perceive massive shapes moving beyond them, highly indistinct forms that might have been advanced equipment, structural architecture, or something else entirely beyond human comprehension. His cabin was resting on what looked like an elevated platform, though he couldn't determine what material the platform was constructed from. It seemed to be forged out of the exact same light as everything else. Solid, but simultaneously not solid. And standing perfectly motionless on that platform, maybe 10 feet from his cabin door, was one of them. Callum had seen plenty of supposedly authentic photos and leaked videos of aliens over the decades. The typical greys, boasting big heads and huge, pitch-black eyes. He'd always assumed they looked completely fake, exactly like cheap, rubber Halloween masks. This entity wasn't fake. The biological being stood roughly 5 feet tall, sporting grayish-white skin that seemed to faintly shimmer and refract the ambient blue-white light. Its cranium was undeniably, disproportionately massive, featuring a highly tapered chin and an incredibly high, smooth forehead. The optical organs were precisely as the cultural lore described, impossibly large, almond-shaped, and consumed by solid black. But they weren't merely flat ink. There was a terrifying depth to them, exactly like looking down into deep, freezing water. It was currently wearing something, not standard clothes exactly, but a seamless covering of some kind that appeared to organically blend directly with its skin. Or maybe it was its actual skin. Callum honestly couldn't tell. The entity slowly tilted its head, analytically studying him. Callum was physically incapable of moving a single muscle. He couldn't even force himself to speak. He just stood paralyzed inside his cabin, hands strangling the safety rails, locked in a staring contest with a biological organism that fundamentally shouldn't exist. The being deliberately raised one hand, featuring 3 elongated fingers and an opposable thumb, and executed a fluid gesture. It wasn't directed toward Callum, but rather toward a coordinate directly behind his cabin. Callum violently twisted his neck and immediately spotted 2 identical entities standing motionless behind his unit. He frantically looked to his left and right and discovered even more. At least 6 of them in total, meticulously arranged in a perfect circle completely surrounding his cabin. One of the entities smoothly approached the cabin door. Callum watched in absolute frozen horror as the being extended its hand toward the exterior latch. It didn't physically touch the metal handle. It didn't need to. The heavy door simply swung open on its own, gliding outward smoothly, entirely ignoring the fact that the mechanical deadbolt was fully engaged. A wave of freezing air violently rushed into the cabin. However, it wasn't the standard earth cold of the Colorado Rockies. This felt fundamentally wrong, exactly as if the atmosphere itself had been imported from somewhere it shouldn't be. The entity hovering outside the threshold executed another gesture, unmistakably an invitation or an absolute command. Come out. Every single biological survival instinct hardwired into Callum's brain was screaming at him to remain anchored inside the cabin, to aggressively refuse, to physically fight back. But his nervous system was no longer accepting input from his conscious mind. He helplessly felt his own legs begin to move. He felt his torso drift forward. He felt his heavy winter boots physically connect with the glowing, ethereal surface of the exterior platform. The material was impossibly smooth, bordering on completely frictionless, and he somehow inherently registered that the surface was radiating a comforting warmth despite the freezing alien air. He was now standing completely exposed outside his cabin, entirely encircled by the silent beings. The closest entity took a single, deliberate step toward his position. Callum desperately attempted to scramble backward, but his physical form entirely refused to cooperate. He was completely locked in a state of absolute paralysis, forcefully immobilized by an unseen, incomprehensible force he could neither perceive nor understand. The entity slowly reached out with one of its elongated, multi-jointed hands and gently pressed its fingertips directly against Callum's temple. His entire conscious reality violently exploded. A torrential flood of raw imagery and conceptual data violently invaded his mind, transferring at a velocity far too aggressive to properly process. He vividly saw the entire planet Earth suspended in space. He saw the intricate thread of the resort's gondola line slicing across the pitch-black mountain. He witnessed himself standing entirely alone on the summit platform from the night before. He observed his own physical form from impossible, elevated angles. He perceived other human beings, dozens, hundreds of them. Fellow resort workers, vacationing visitors, complete strangers he had never met. Every single one of them going about their mundane days, completely unaware that they were relentlessly being watched. He witnessed the blinding spheres of light hovering ominously over the gondola cabins. However, he now perceived them from an internal perspective, inherently understanding somehow that they weren't merely lights at all. They were highly advanced observers, biological collectors, complex samplers. His human vocabulary simply lacked the necessary words to accurately define what they actually were. He watched the strict flow of time aggressively stretching and compressing. He observed the exact same moment repeatedly playing out from wildly different, overlapping angles. He witnessed complex timelines aggressively branching outward and converging back upon themselves exactly like the chaotic roots of a tree. And then, he saw himself standing paralyzed right there on the glowing platform, viewed entirely from the first-person perspective of the specific entity currently touching his temple. He literally saw himself reflected through those bottomless, pitch-black eyes. He was forced to comprehend exactly how incredibly microscopic he was, how profoundly fragile his biology was, and how painfully temporary his existence amounted to. The entity finally withdrew its slender hand. Callum violently staggered backward. He would have instantly collapsed if his physical body hadn't been artificially held upright by whatever invisible force was actively controlling his movements. His conscious mind was aggressively reeling, desperately attempting to catalog and organize the apocalyptic cascade of raw images and sensory data. The specific being that had initiated the contact slowly tilted its head again, and Callum suddenly, implicitly understood, although he possessed no logical explanation as to how he knew, that the entity was entirely satisfied. The clinical examination was officially complete. Another being silently glided forward, carrying a specific physical object. It loosely resembled a highly slender rod, maybe 8 inches in length, forged from an unknown metamaterial that captured and refracted the ambient light in deeply unnatural ways. The entity elevated the instrument, presenting it clearly for Callum, and once again, a wave of wordless comprehension flooded his mind. This is specifically for you. This is the mandated price for the privilege of seeing. The entity smoothly pressed the tip of the rod directly against Callum's right forearm, positioning it just below the elbow joint. There was absolutely no physical pain, merely a brief, highly concentrated sensation of pressure, exactly like receiving a routine blood draw. When the being withdrew the instrument, a distinct mark remained branded into Callum's skin. It was a mathematically perfect circle, roughly the size of a dime, featuring a microscopic dot precisely in the center. The geometric brand faintly radiated a soft, blue glow for a brief moment before rapidly fading out to perfectly match his skin tone. Unless you were actively hunting for it, you'd never notice it. The entire circle of entities simultaneously took a synchronized step backward, meticulously re-establishing their flawless geometric perimeter. The primary entity who had touched his temple raised its hand once more, exposing its palm, and Callum instantly felt the invisible paralysis completely release. He violently stumbled backward, catching himself against the cold exterior steel of his cabin. What exactly did you just do to me? What is this? Absolutely zero response. The ring of entities simply remained anchored in place, silently observing his panic through those unfathomable black eyes. The ambient, glowing light of the massive chamber slowly began to fade. Callum physically felt his heavy cabin re-engage its motion, initiating a slow, controlled descent back into the void. Wait. What is your ultimate objective? Why exactly are you here? The suffocating, absolute darkness aggressively surged back in, swallowing the environment. The final visual Callum managed to process was that silent, motionless circle of highly advanced beings, patiently watching him plummet back down into the freezing night. And in the very next microsecond, he was seamlessly back on the heavy steel cable. He was completely plunged back into the standard, ordinary darkness of a Colorado mountain night. His maintenance cabin violently jerked as the heavy clamps successfully reconnected with the primary gondola drive system. The dim, crimson emergency lights inside his cabin abruptly flickered back to life. After enduring the absolute void, the faint red illumination felt blindingly bright. His tactical radio violently exploded with chaotic noise. Callum, please respond immediately. Are you there? It was Ava. He frantically snatched the heavy radio. I'm right here. I'm okay. Oh, thank God, she breathed, the sheer relief palpable. The master electrical system just violently came back online. Where is your exact coordinate? Callum peered out the window. Far below, he could see the warm glow of the base station lights, and the silhouette of the summit station high above. According to the visual position indicators, he was suspended precisely between Pylon 2 and Pylon 3. He was occupying the exact identical location he had been crossing when the massive blackout triggered. I'm positioned between Pylons 2 and 3. Exactly how long was I out of contact? 47 entire minutes. Callum immediately snapped his gaze down to his watch. The digital dial read 1:34 a.m. The very last time he had consciously checked the time, it had been 12:47. 47 completely deleted minutes. It was almost the exact identical duration of missing time he had suffered during the previous night's encounter. Callum, are you harboring any physical injuries? Do you need us to manually bring you down? He slowly looked down at the geometric mark etched into his forearm. It was undeniably still there, remaining perfectly circular, entirely visible if he focused his eyes on it. No, no. I am completely unhurt. I'm initiating my descent now. Negative. Stay exactly where you are. We are actively activating the emergency retrieval protocol. Ava, I just said I am perfectly fine. I am bringing the cabin down. A heavy, incredibly tense pause stretched across the link. Did something happen up there? Callum slowly tilted his head back, staring directly upward through the cabin's roof into the endless, pitch-black sky. Yeah, something highly significant happened. He executed a painfully slow descent, the maintenance cabin gently swaying against the steel cable. Superficially, the entire environment appeared entirely ordinary once more. The stars were brilliant. The freezing mountain wind was blowing. The ambient temperature registered its standard, brutal 15 degrees. It was almost exactly as if the reality-bending nightmare had never taken place. But he inherently knew better. He gently ghosted his fingertips over the microscopic brand on his forearm, physically feeling the faint, raised texture of the altered tissue. Whatever complex procedure they had subjected him to, whatever foreign data they had put inside him, it was undeniably, permanently real. The exact second his cabin finally docked at the base station, Ava was already pacing the platform, flanked by a fully equipped medical team. They aggressively checked him over the moment he stepped out, completely ignoring his frantic protests. They shined high-intensity penlights directly into his pupils, rigorously monitored his pulse, and relentlessly asked him cognitive questions. He is completely stable, the lead medic finally announced. Vitals are reading perfectly normal. Absolutely no signs of neurological shock or hypothermia. I literally just finished telling you people that I was fine, Callum grumbled. Ava immediately grabbed him by the sleeve and physically pulled him aside, dragging him away from the bustling team. What in God's name actually transpired up there? Before I explain anything, I urgently need you to do a massive favor for me. I need you to immediately isolate and review the recorded footage captured by your infrared arrays spanning the exact time frame that we lost communication. Callum, every single optical camera went entirely dark. We didn't successfully capture a single frame of footage. I don't care. Check the digital archives anyway, please. They swiftly relocated to the fortified security office. Ava aggressively pulled up the digital files from the preceding hour and began meticulously scrubbing through the data, advancing the timeline frame by agonizing frame. There is absolutely zero data here, she sighed in frustration. From exactly 1247 straight through to 134, every single camera monitoring the mountain was, wait. She instantly killed the playback and slowly nudged the digital timeline backward by a handful of individual frames. There is an anomaly buried right here. Captured exclusively on the dedicated infrared data feed, there was a singular, isolated frame of visual information. Just one. Representing perhaps 1/30th of a single second in real time, the optical array had successfully documented something. It was an impossibly massive, intensely glowing heat signature locked in a dead hover directly above the primary gondola line. It was unfathomably colossal, easily spanning over 100 feet across in diameter, shaped like an elongated oval. And terrifyingly, trapped entirely within its glowing, superheated boundaries, the thermal sensor had registered smaller, distinct heat signatures. Dozens upon dozens of them, actively moving around inside the entity. What in the absolute hell is that thing? Ava whispered, her face completely drained of color. That is precisely where I was located, Callum stated quietly. I was physically inside of that. He systematically unpacked the entire, horrifying ordeal for her. The towering biological entities. The glowing, frictionless platform. The violent, apocalyptic flood of telepathic imagery they had forced into his mind. The permanent, geometric brand burned into his arm. When he finally concluded his testimony, Ava sat perfectly still in the glow of the monitors, wrapped in a suffocating silence for an incredibly long duration. You actually believe my story, don't you? Callum said. It wasn't framed as a question, it was an established fact. I absolutely do. And I believe you because we are currently staring at a single frame of undeniable infrared evidence that officially confirms a colossal, superheated mass was physically hovering directly over our gondola line. I believe you because we have impossible, geometric impact craters scorched into the summit powder that fundamentally defy explanation. Because every single piece of redundant technology on this mountain catastrophically failed in perfect synchronization with zero logical cause. Because she hesitated, swallowing hard. Because I witnessed something out there, too. Callum's head snapped up. What did you see? While we were standing down at the base station, desperately waiting for you to re-establish contact, right before the primary power grid violently rebooted itself, I cast my gaze up toward the dark peak of the mountain. And I saw an incredibly brilliant light. It lasted for a fraction of a second. It possessed that exact same, piercing blue-white spectrum you detailed. And then it completely vanished into thin air. Callum slumped heavily back into his chair. So, what is our operational game plan here? I honestly don't know. Ava minimized the infrared window and pulled up the high-resolution photographs detailing the flawless marks discovered at the summit station. But I strongly believe our absolute highest priority is to meticulously document everything. Every minor incident, every fleeting visual sighting, every solitary scrap of physical evidence we can successfully lay our hands on. And then what is the ultimate endgame? We report this compiled data to who, exactly? Do you honestly believe a single government agency is going to believe our narrative? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But if this nightmare is actively unfolding at our specific location, it is highly probable it is simultaneously occurring at other high-altitude resorts, other isolated places. We might not be the sole victims of this. Callum cast a tired glance at his wristwatch. 2:17 a.m. In a mere handful of hours, the resort would officially open its gates, and many hundreds of completely oblivious tourists would eagerly pile into those gondola cabins to ride up the mountain, entirely ignorant of the cosmic horror that had transpired in that exact airspace mere hours prior. I absolutely cannot operate the gondola maintenance shifts anymore, he confessed softly. I just simply can't do it. I completely understand your position. However, I am not abandoning this installation. Not yet. I desperately need to uncover what their ultimate objective is, and why they specifically selected this mountain. Ava offered a slow, determined nod. So, we simply maintain a low profile. We quietly document the anomalies, and we wait for them to inevitably return. Do you honestly believe they will manifest again? She shifted her gaze back to that singular, terrifying frame of infrared footage, staring at that colossal, superheated silhouette effortlessly hovering in the suffocating darkness. I know with absolute certainty that they will. Their terrifying hypothesis was undeniably correct. Over the course of the subsequent 2 weeks, the resort suffered 6 additional, highly anomalous incidents. These manifestations were no longer strictly confined to the graveyard shift. On 2 separate occasions, early morning employees formally reported observing bizarre illuminations lingering in the sky just prior to sunrise. One veteran lift operator practically swore she witnessed a massive entity hovering directly above the mid-mountain lodge, although by the time the security response team arrived at her coordinates, the airspace was completely vacant. The impossible geometric markings persistently continued to manifest. They discovered them clustered around Pylon 3 near the summit lodge, and on one terrifying occasion, planted dead center in the middle of a completely empty parking lot. 3 flawlessly circular, deep indentations aggressively compressed into the powder. And predictably, the employees were actively beginning to whisper. They weren't discussing it officially, and certainly not within earshot of upper management. However, in the secluded break rooms, out in the freezing parking lots, and while riding the isolated chairlifts, the paranoid rumors were rapidly spreading. Something massive was fundamentally wrong at Copper Ridge. Something unfathomable was actively watching them. On the 16th consecutive night following Callum's horrific encounter, marking exactly 1 full month since his initial sighting, Ava was stationed entirely alone in the security hub when the massive wall of monitors violently snapped to pitch black once again. She had been actively anticipating this exact moment. She instantly snatched her tactical radio and her heavy winter gear and sprinted for the exit. Tonight, she absolutely refused to passively monitor the nightmare from the safety of the base station. Tonight, she was going directly up the mountain. She commandeered a heavy patrol snowmobile and drove aggressively up the steep, winding mountain access road, pushing the machine's throttle to its absolute physical limit. The high-altitude wind was absolutely brutal, and the ambient temperature was hovering dangerously close to zero. Yet, she refused to ease off the accelerator. She successfully reached Pylon 2 and was forced to abandon the snowmobile. The remainder of the grueling vertical climb would have to be executed entirely on foot. The brutal hike to Pylon 3 consumed 23 agonizing minutes. Ava was practically gasping for oxygen in the incredibly thin mountain air by the time she breached the perimeter, her lungs violently burning, yet she relentlessly pushed her body forward, trudging as rapidly as humanly possible through the suffocatingly deep powder. When she finally crested the ridge and reached the summit station, she instantly froze in her tracks. The blinding lights were all there. Every single one of them. Dozens upon dozens of those piercing blue-white spheres were hovering ominously over the primary gondola line, stretching cascading down the dark face of the mountain as far as her eyes could possibly track. They rhythmically pulsed in flawless unison, breathing pure, ethereal light into the suffocating darkness. And anchored directly above the summit station loomed the apex entity, the colossal, cigar-shaped craft, easily measuring over 150 feet in length, suspended in an absolutely dead, mathematically perfect hover. Ava frantically ripped her digital camera from her jacket and began aggressively snapping photographs. Frame after frame, desperately securing as much high-resolution documentation as the hardware would allow. And then, she physically felt it. That exact, terrifying sensation Callum had so vividly described. The crushing, suffocating feeling of being clinically examined by an unseen intellect. She slowly tilted her head upward and watched as one of the smaller, glowing spheres deliberately detached itself from the massive armada, gliding smoothly down toward her exact position. It traversed the airspace with absolute silence, completely devoid of any visible propulsion mechanics, merely sliding through the atmosphere exactly as if it were effortlessly floating on a calm body of water. It abruptly halted exactly 10 feet in front of her face, locking into a flawless hover directly at eye level. Ava stubbornly held her ground. Her hands were violently trembling, but she forced the heavy camera lens to remain elevated, relentlessly continuing to shoot. The brilliant sphere pulsed softly exactly once. And in that singular microsecond, Ava understood. The information was not delivered via spoken words or recognizable thoughts. It was a flood of pure, unadulterated cosmic comprehension violently downloaded directly into her consciousness. They were systematically studying, meticulously observing. They were actively learning about the human species utilizing the exact same clinical methodology that human biologists employ to study wild animals from a concealed distance, applying minimal physical interference, extracting necessary biological samples and behavioral data, and seamlessly moving on. They had been occupying this specific airspace for an incredibly long duration. Vastly longer than the ski resort had existed. Significantly longer than the local town had been established. Millennia before primitive humans had even begun to migrate into these jagged mountain ranges. And they would relentlessly continue their silent, clinical observation long after the resort eventually crumbled into dust. The glowing sphere pulsed a second time, and the telepathic understanding significantly deepened. They were patiently waiting. Waiting for what, exactly? Ava's human mind couldn't entirely process the data. Perhaps they were waiting for humanity to organically cross a specific evolutionary threshold. Perhaps they were bracing for something vastly more catastrophic entirely. However, one terrifying fact was absolute. These cosmic observers were infinitely patient. They possessed time in terrifying abundance. The isolated sphere slowly initiated a vertical ascent, seamlessly returning to its designated position within the massive armada hovering above the gondola line. Ava slowly lowered her heavy camera and remained planted in the deep snow, silently watching as the brilliant fleet began to systematically fade away. One by agonizing one, they silently winked out of existence, the glowing spheres disappearing into the void exactly like fading stars surrendering to the dawn. The colossal cigar-shaped apex craft rose silently into the black heavens, effortlessly climbing higher and higher until it masqueraded as just another distant, ordinary point of starlight. And then, it was entirely gone. Ava stood completely alone on the freezing summit for an incredibly long time, physically crushed by the sheer existential weight of what she had just survived. When she finally initiated her long trek back down to the base station, the morning sun was already beginning to aggressively breach the horizon. The massive resort was rapidly roaring to life. Heavy grooming machines were actively chugging up the lower slopes. Early morning kitchen staff were arriving at the various lodges. The very first wave of eager, over-caffeinated skiers were pulling their vehicles into the primary parking lot. Callum was already anxiously waiting for her outside the security office doors. "You saw the entities," he stated. "It wasn't a question. I saw every single one of them. Did they actively force images into your mind?" "Not exactly the way they aggressively downloaded data into yours. But I understood them. I strongly believe we both fully understand the reality now." Callum offered a slow, incredibly heavy nod. "So, what exactly are we supposed to tell the public?" Ava shifted her gaze out toward the sprawling gondola line, observing the empty passenger cabins swaying gently against the crisp morning breeze. Thousands of completely oblivious people would happily cram themselves into those exact cabins today, laughing and enthusiastically planning their runs, entirely ignorant of the fact that something incredibly vast and utterly incomprehensible had been hovering directly above that exact hardware mere hours prior. "We tell them absolutely nothing," she finalized. "Not yet. Not until we secure evidence that is infinitely more concrete." "You mean not until we possess proof that the authorities cannot instantly dismiss as a hoax?" "Exactly. And what is our protocol until that happens?" "Until that specific moment arrives, we simply watch. We meticulously document the anomalies. And we wait." Callum subconsciously rubbed the faint, geometric mark permanently branded into his forearm. "Exactly how long do you suspect they will continue to return to this mountain?" Ava booted up the master security archive and slowly scrolled through the massive digital directory. Months of recorded files. Hundreds upon hundreds of hours of mundane footage. However, now that she possessed the terrifying knowledge of exactly what to hunt for, she could easily spot their subtle signatures. Incredibly brief flashes of unnatural light. Momentary, inexplicable heat signatures blossoming on the infrared. Chronological gaps in the recordings that were entirely too surgically precise to be classified as coincidental glitches. "I genuinely believe they have always been here," she whispered quietly. "We are simply just now finally paying attention to the shadows." That evening, as she finally locked the security office to head home, Ava cast one final, searching glance up toward the jagged mountain peaks. The massive gondola cable stretched up into the suffocating darkness, eventually vanishing into the star-saturated sky. And for a fleeting, terrifying microsecond, perhaps a full second, perhaps significantly less, she swore she detected a faint, piercing blue-white glow hovering directly above the summit. Silently watching. Endlessly waiting. She climbed into her vehicle and began the long drive home, the crushing, existential weight of the secret pressing violently down on her shoulders. Tomorrow morning, the ski resort would unlock its gates once again. Oblivious tourists would ski, families would laugh, and thousands of photographs would be snapped of the breathtaking mountain vistas. And somewhere incredibly high above their heads, perfectly concealed within the vast, freezing Colorado sky, something vastly superior would be relentlessly watching, clinically learning, and patiently waiting. Perhaps you have personally visited the Copper Ridge Resort. Perhaps you have eagerly ridden that exact same gondola, happily watching the stunning mountain scenery slide past your frosted cabin window, completely failing to realize what impossible entity might have been locked in a dead hover just a few dozen feet above your skull. Perhaps you have occasionally spotted a bizarre light darting across the night sky and immediately rationalized it away to yourself, convincing your brain it was merely a commercial airplane, an orbiting satellite, or simply optical fatigue playing tricks on your retinas. Or maybe, just maybe, deep down in your primitive subconscious, you already knew better. If you ever find yourself assigned to a graveyard shift at a high-altitude ski resort, and if you ever happen to look up and spot a brilliant illumination occupying airspace where absolutely nothing should exist, if you ever experience that primal, suffocating sensation of being clinically observed from an empty black sky, I urge you to remember Callum's terrifying ordeal. Remember Ava's heavily encrypted files filled with impossible photographs, quietly waiting for the specific day when human society might actually be psychologically prepared to process them. And always remember this terrifying reality. We are absolutely not alone on these mountains. We literally never were. Have you ever witnessed something that fundamentally violates the established laws of reality? I am not referring to something overtly terrifying or physically dangerous. I mean encountering something that aggressively shatters the very rules dictating how the physical world is supposed to operate. That is exactly what happened to me on the night of February 23rd, and to this day, I remain completely incapable of rationalizing the event. My given name is Harlan Pierce, and I officially operate a heavy-duty snowcat machine for the Summit Peak Resort located in the Colorado Rockies. I have been executing this specific job for 9 solid years now. It is incredibly isolating work. It is literally just you, the roaring diesel engine of the machine, and the endless task of grinding back and forth across pitch-black empty slopes in the dead of night, meticulously smoothing out the powder for the incoming wave of daytime skiers. The vast majority of people assume the job is mind-numbingly boring, but I genuinely love it. Zero human drama, absolutely no crowds, just the hypnotic mechanical rhythm of the labor and the vast isolation of the mountain. Our designated night shift runs strictly from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. We are required to meticulously groom every single designated run on the entire mountain, top to bottom, ensuring the corduroy pattern is absolutely flawless before the lifts fire up at 8 a.m. It essentially consumes the entire night to properly cover all 83 established runs. And you are operating completely alone for the overwhelming majority of the shift. It's just you, a massive metal snowcat, and roughly 12,000 vertical feet of untamed Colorado wilderness. That specific night kicked off exactly like any other. The ambient temperature was hovering at a steady 12 degrees. The wind was completely dead. Optical visibility was absolutely perfect. A fresh layer of powder had dumped across the range the previous afternoon, roughly 4 solid inches, meaning the grooming process would be incredibly smooth. An easy, highly predictable shift. I initiated my grooming route right at the summit, methodically working my way down the highly advanced slopes first. Diamond Ridge, Black Thunder, the Widowmaker. All the terrifyingly steep runs that cause advanced skiers' heart rates to spike during the daylight hours were currently completely empty and dead silent, bathed under the aggressive glare of my heavy headlights. The massive grooming blade of my snowcat effortlessly sliced through the fresh powder exactly like a hot knife through butter, leaving that highly satisfying, flawless corduroy texture in its wake. Right around midnight, I finally reached the North Face sector. These particular runs are designated exclusively for true experts. They are incredibly steep, excessively long, boasting a terrifying vertical drop exceeding 2,000 feet. During peak operating hours, they are heavily congested with advanced athletes. At night, they belong entirely to you. I was roughly halfway through grooming the slope designated as Avalanche Alley when I abruptly saw it. A singular, isolated ski track. Now, I understand that might not sound remotely anomalous to a layman. Obviously, people actively ski at resorts constantly. However, this highly specific track was carved into a run that had been officially chained off and closed to the public since 4 p.m. I had personally watched the ski patrol unit execute their final, exhaustive sweep of the sector, and I physically witnessed them anchor the heavy closure ropes across the top access point. Absolutely nobody should have had access to this specific slope for the past 8 hours. I instantly killed the snowcat's forward momentum, threw the transmission into park, and climbed down from the heated cab to secure a closer visual. The physical track was incredibly fresh. Terrifyingly fresh. I could easily decipher the razor-sharp edge marks where the skis had violently carved through the top layer of powder. It ran aggressively straight down the absolute fall line of the mountain, flawlessly smooth and impossibly controlled. It was the exact kind of high-speed track left behind by an absolute masterclass skier. There were zero amateur wobbles, absolutely no erratic skid marks, just pure, surgical carved turns flowing endlessly from the peak down toward the base. But here is the specific detail that caused the skin on my arms to crawl. It was a singular, isolated track. It wasn't a parallel set of two tracks, which is what a standard human skier would inevitably leave behind. It was a single, continuous groove. It looked exactly as if someone had aggressively bombed down this terrifyingly steep mountain, balancing perfectly on a single ski, miraculously maintaining flawless equilibrium, carving razor-sharp turns, and never once allowing their opposite foot to make contact with the snow. I stood there frozen in the biting cold, my ragged breath heavily fogging in the glare of the snowcat's headlights, staring completely blankly at this physics-defying groove. A human being cannot physically ski on a single board like that. Absolutely not down an expert-level slope this severely pitched, and undeniably not executing turns possessing this degree of surgical precision. The physics of the action were fundamentally impossible. I quickly snatched the heavy tactical radio strapped to my chest. Patrol base. This is Harlan, currently operating on the north face grid. Do you copy my transmission? A brief burst of static, followed by a voice. This is base. Go ahead with your report, Harlan. I have discovered an unauthorized ski track carved into Avalanche Alley. It is an incredibly fresh mark. Someone has actively breached the perimeter up here. A heavy, deliberate pause hummed over the frequency. Negative on that, Harlan. Every single run in that sector was formally swept and chained closed at 1,600 hours. Are you absolutely positive the track is recent? I am 100% positive. I am physically staring directly at it right now. The edge carvings are surgically clean. There is zero wind fill degrading the groove. This track was undeniably laid down within the past 60 to 120 minutes. Stand by. I waited in the freezing silence, my eyes tracing the impossible track as it vanished down the steep slope, plunging into the impenetrable darkness existing just beyond the reach of my high-beam headlights. The mountain wind had begun to pick up slightly, but certainly not with enough ferocity to logically explain this anomaly. Furthermore, stray wind currents absolutely do not carve flawless ski tracks into fresh powder. Harlan, we have meticulously reviewed the security camera archives positioned at the summit access points. Absolutely no unauthorized personnel accessed Avalanche Alley following the formal closure. The primary rope line remains completely undisturbed, and the optical feeds display zero suspicious activity. That is a physical impossibility. I am currently standing inches away from a fresh ski track. Could it potentially be a residual mark left over from before the official closing procedures? Perhaps the sweep patrol simply failed to notice it during their final run. Absolutely no way. This is a fresh carving. I can visually confirm exactly where it violently cuts directly through the fresh powder layer that fell this evening. Another heavy pause. All right, log the exact GPS coordinates of the anomaly and resume your grooming schedule. We will dispatch a patrol operative up to that sector to properly investigate the scene at first light. I desperately wanted to argue with the dispatcher, to violently demand that they send a security unit up here immediately to witness it. But what exactly was I supposed to articulate? That I had discovered an impossible, physics-defying ski track? That an unidentified entity had flawlessly bombed down a closed, expert slope in the dead of night, miraculously bypassing every single security camera and heavy closure chain? Copy that, I muttered reluctantly. I hauled myself back into the heated cab of the snowcat and engaged the heavy grooming blade, but my brain completely refused to drop the issue. I found myself endlessly checking the massive side view mirrors, agonizingly watching that flawless, impossible line of compressed snow being violently chewed up and permanently erased beneath the heavy machinery of my rig, vanishing forever into the freshly laid corduroy pattern. It required roughly 40 minutes to successfully groom the entirety of Avalanche Alley. When I finally reached the bottom of the steep run and smoothly pivoted the massive machine around to inspect my handiwork, a standard habit I maintain to verify I didn't miss any patchy spots, I saw something that caused my heavy hands to instantly lock into a death grip around the steering controls. An entirely separate, fresh track. This specific groove was carved into the slope running immediately adjacent to Avalanche Alley, a notoriously dangerous run formerly designated as freefall. Much like Avalanche Alley, this sector had been heavily chained and closed to the public since 4 p.m. And exactly like the initial discovery, this track was incredibly fresh, surgically clean, and impossibly singular. I instantly grabbed the radio mic once more. Patrol Base, this is Harlan. I have just located a secondary anomaly. I'm currently looking at a fresh track on freefall. It is another completely singular groove. Affirmative, Harlan. Are you absolutely certain these tracks aren't merely remnants from earlier in the afternoon? Perhaps the fresh powder coverage across that sector is simply heavily uneven. I am unequivocally certain these carvings are fresh. They are located on strictly closed runs, and they are both singular, one-ski tracks. I am telling you, someone or something is actively utilizing these upper slopes right this second. That is a statistical impossibility. We possess high-definition cameras monitoring every single major access point on the ridge. If a trespasser had infiltrated that elevation, our systems would have absolutely flagged them. Then I urge you to provide a logical explanation for these tracks. Complete silence flooded the radio channel. In my mind's eye, I could vividly picture the graveyard patrol unit huddled together inside the base lodge, nervously exchanging glances, desperately attempting to determine if I was suffering from extreme altitude hallucinations or if a genuinely terrifying anomaly was unfolding on their mountain. All right, the dispatcher's voice finally crackled back. We are officially deploying Shelby up the ridge utilizing the high-speed patrol snowmobile. She should breach your coordinates in roughly 20 minutes. Are you capable of holding your position on freefall until she makes contact? Shelby Rollins operated as the ruthless, no-nonsense night patrol supervisor. If any individual on this entire payroll possessed the investigative skills required to decode this nightmare, it was undeniably her. Copy that. I will kill the engine and wait right here. I completely powered down the massive snowcat and climbed back down onto the freezing powder. The sheer silence of the mountain was incredibly immediate and profoundly absolute. Operating at this extreme altitude, we were sitting at roughly 11,000 feet. Acoustics do not travel the way they do down at sea level. The incredibly thin atmosphere actively devours ambient noise, stranding you inside a suffocating bubble of absolute quiet that feels terrifyingly supernatural. I clicked on my heavy-duty headlamp and began cautiously hiking up the steep slope, strictly following the trajectory of the fresh track. It ran aggressively straight and unbelievably true, flawlessly mirroring the characteristics of the first anomaly. Perfect, surgical carved turns, incredibly consistent edge pressure, unquestionable expert-level technique, yet entirely restricted to a single ski. I relentlessly tracked the groove for perhaps 200 yards, my heavy winter boots aggressively crunching into the powder, my lungs heavily burning as I fought for oxygen in the thin atmosphere. The single track continued endlessly ahead of me, eventually vanishing into the suffocating wall of darkness. And then, roughly 300 yards up from where I had parked my rig, the impossible track simply ceased to exist. It didn't gradually fade away. It didn't culminate with a heavy, spraying final turn, nor was there a cluster of disturbed snow indicating that a skier had physically unclipped from their bindings. It merely terminated dead in the middle of a massive, sweeping carve. It looked exactly as if the physical entity generating the track had been violently, instantly yanked straight up into the sky. I stood completely paralyzed, my heart pounding, staring blankly at the exact coordinate where the deep groove terminated. The vast expanse of snow radiating beyond that specific point was completely, flawlessly undisturbed. There were absolutely zero boot prints. There were no frantic scuff marks. There wasn't a single shred of physical evidence suggesting that anything possessing mass had even occupied that space. The track literally just ended. I physically felt the short hairs on the back of my neck violently stand at attention. The freezing ambient temperature seemed to aggressively plummet, pressing heavily against my exposed skin exactly like a physical, suffocating weight. The mountain silence was so incredibly absolute that the frantic, heavy thudding of my own heartbeat was deafening. I slowly pivoted on my heels, aggressively sweeping the entire slope with the blinding beam of my headlamp. Absolutely nothing. Just an endless ocean of vacant white snow sprawling endlessly in every conceivable direction, accompanied solely by that singular, physics-breaking groove trailing down the steep slope behind my boots, terminating exactly where I currently stood. And that is precisely the moment I registered the terrifying anomaly regarding the snow itself. At the exact coordinate where the deep track abruptly terminated, the surrounding powder possessed a deeply unnatural quality. It appeared completely standard upon initial inspection, but when I dropped to my knees and analyzed the structure at close range, I distinctly noticed a highly subtle, bizarre discoloration. The pure white snow wasn't actually white. It possessed a terrifyingly faint, ethereal blue tinge, a detail that was almost entirely imperceptible unless you were explicitly hunting for it. I slowly peeled off my heavy insulated glove and pressed my bare flesh directly against the powder. It was unspeakably colder than it physically should have been. It wasn't merely a freezing temperature, it felt fundamentally wrong. The thermal profile was heavily distorted, feeling exactly as if the localized patch of snow had been violently, instantly flash-frozen to absolute zero, and then allowed to only partially thaw. My tactical radio suddenly snapped with heavy static. "Harlan, this is Shelby. I am roughly 5 minutes out from your sector. What is your exact 20? I am positioned roughly 300 yards up freefall, measuring from the bottom access point. Simply trace the singular ski track upward. You literally cannot miss my location." "Copy that." I hauled myself back to my feet and waited in the freezing void, silently tracking the blinding beam of my headlamp as it desperately attempted to pierce the oppressive darkness. The erratic mountain wind had entirely flatlined, plunging the environment into that terrifying, eerie silence that makes it feel exactly as if the entire planet is holding its breath. When the powerful headlights of Shelby's patrol snowmobile finally pierced the darkness at the base of the slope, a massive wave of pure relief washed over me. At the absolute minimum, I would no longer be stranded alone with this reality-bending nightmare. She aggressively roared up the steep incline, parked directly next to my position, and instantly killed the loud engine. The terrifying silence violently rushed back in to fill the void. "All right, show me the anomaly," she demanded, swinging her leg off the machine. I simply aimed the beam of my headlamp directly at the groove in the powder. It initiates entirely down at the base, runs all the way up this steep incline, and then completely terminates right at this exact coordinate. Shelby remained entirely quiet for a remarkably long moment, her eyes intensely analyzing the deep carve. She was a hardened veteran in her mid-40s, boasting over 2 decades of grueling mountain patrol experience, and I had absolutely never witnessed her look even remotely spooked by a situation. However, I could undeniably read the profound confusion aggressively warring across her features right now. "A completely singular track," she whispered quietly into the frozen air. "Yeah, that is physically impossible. I am entirely aware." She methodically paced alongside the deep groove, tracing its trajectory right up to the abrupt termination point. I stood back and observed as she dropped to her knees, rigorously analyzing the bizarrely tinted snow in the exact same manner I had moments prior. When she finally stood back up, her facial features had been forcefully hammered into an impenetrable, strictly neutral mask. "Harlan, when was the absolute last time you had your personal oxygen saturation levels formally checked? Operating at this extreme altitude can occasionally trigger severe psychological tricks regarding your visual perception." "My O2 levels are perfectly fine. This is absolutely not a symptom of altitude sickness, Shelby. Literally look at the physical track." I am looking directly at it, and my brain is frantically attempting to manufacture a sane, rational explanation for what I am actively observing. Yeah, well, good luck with that. She smoothly retrieved a compact digital camera from her heavy patrol vest and immediately began documenting the scene with rapid, high-resolution flashes. I will thoroughly document this specific coordinate and formally forward the data to upper management at first light. For the time being, I need you to climb back into your rig and resume your scheduled grooming. We absolutely cannot leave these primary slopes unfinished for the morning crowd. You literally want me to just fire up the blade and groom directly over this? I demanded. What alternative do we possess? Are we supposed to string up hazard ropes? Broadcast to the tourists that a mysterious, physics-defying ski track manifested out of thin air. She undeniably had a highly logical point. Yet, there was something deeply, viscerally wrong about willfully destroying this terrifying piece of evidence. What about the identical track I discovered over on Avalanche Alley? I asked. You already ran the grooming blade completely over that sector, right? Yes, but I could easily guide you to the exact coordinates where it was located. Harlan. She locked eyes with me, her expression intensely serious. I genuinely believe that you witnessed something highly anomalous tonight. However, we are required to remain completely practical about this situation. Snap your own photographs. Meticulously document whatever data you can salvage, and resume your assigned workload. I will formally file a highly detailed incident report, and we will aggressively investigate this anomaly tomorrow under the sunlight. She was undeniably correct, of course. That was the professional protocol. However, as I slowly trudged back to my massive snowcat and hauled myself up into the heated cabin, I was completely unable to shake the suffocating, terrifying feeling that we were willfully ignoring a significantly more massive, apocalyptic picture that was actively unfolding right under our noses. I spent the remainder of my long shift powering through my scheduled grooming runs, yet my concentration was entirely shattered. Every single time I cast my gaze out across the vast, empty slopes, I half expected to witness another track manifesting, another impossible, singular line being carved into the powder by a force that fundamentally shouldn't exist. By the time the morning sun finally began to breach the horizon at 6:30 a.m., I had successfully groomed every last run on the mountain. It was standard labor from that point onward, completely devoid of fresh anomalies. Nonetheless, my brain relentlessly cycled back to that impossible single track, analyzing the exact manner in which it had simply terminated in the dead center of the steep incline, and obsessing over that inexplicably bizarre blue tinge clinging to the snow. I parked my heavy snowcat in the designated equipment yard and trudged toward the main break room to secure a cup of coffee before heading home. The standard day shift was already beginning to trickle in. Lift operators, cheerful ticket sellers, seasoned ski instructors, completely ordinary people clocking in for completely ordinary labor, entirely oblivious to the terrifying reality that something deeply unnatural was actively happening on their mountain. Shelby eventually tracked me down in the break room. I was huddled alone at a table, clutching my coffee mug, my eyes locked blankly onto the distant north face runs visible through the window. "Are you holding up okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just incredibly exhausted. Look, I know what we found was deeply strange, but sometimes there are perfectly rational explanations for anomalies that initially appear impossible. Perhaps it was merely a bizarre animal track that your brain misinterpreted as a ski carve in the extreme darkness. Or perhaps the localized wind drift patterns simply generated a highly convincing optical illusion." She took the seat directly across the table from me. I rigorously reviewed the master camera footage captured at the summit myself. There was absolutely no one operating on that specific run, Harlan. The security feeds display entirely empty slopes for the entire duration of the night. Then your expensive cameras completely missed something. Or perhaps, and I am merely throwing this theory out into the open, maybe you are simply exhausted. You have been grinding out the graveyard shift for 9 solid years. That kind of schedule exacts a massive neurological toll. I desperately wanted to argue the point, to insist that my mind was perfectly sound, but what was the actual use? I knew with absolute certainty what I had physically witnessed. Whether Shelby chose to believe my narrative or not wouldn't alter the reality of the situation. "Maybe you're entirely right," I muttered, simply attempting to end the exhausting conversation. She looked visibly relieved by my concession. "Get some serious rest. I will see you back here tonight." I navigated my truck back to my compact cabin tucked in the dense woods, roughly 10 miles out from the main resort. The morning sun was fully dominating the sky now, painting the sprawling, snow-drenched peaks in breathtaking shades of pink and gold. It was a remarkably beautiful morning. An absolutely flawless day for skiing. I should have been able to pass out immediately. I had been awake and functioning for nearly 24 continuous hours, and the heavy physical exhaustion anchored in my bones was undeniable. However, every single time I closed my heavy eyelids, my brain violently projected that singular track. That flawless, impossible line surgically carved into physics-defying powder, abruptly terminating at a highly specific coordinate where the foundational laws of the physical universe seemingly broke down. Right around noon, I completely surrendered my desperate attempt to sleep and brewed fresh coffee. I snatched up my smartphone and initiated an online deep dive, searching for any remotely similar reports. Unexplained grooves in fresh snow, bizarre marks on isolated ski slopes, literally any digital clue that might potentially offer context regarding what I had seen. I found significantly more data than I had originally anticipated. There were documented reports originating from numerous other ski resorts scattered across Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana, essentially anywhere boasting high-altitude skiing. People reporting bizarre, singular tracks magically appearing on closed runs. Chairlifts violently initiating their drive systems entirely on their own, heavy grooming machinery experiencing catastrophic malfunctions completely devoid of logical cause, and lights. Dozens of terrifying reports detailing anomalous, brilliant lights dominating the night sky directly above isolated resorts. Naturally, the overwhelming majority of these accounts had been swiftly dismissed as elaborate internet hoaxes or misidentifications. Yet, there were more than enough highly credible reports, originating from wildly different sources, that I genuinely began to wonder. What if my encounter wasn't an isolated incident? What if a coordinated phenomenon was actively unfolding at isolated ski resorts across the entire Rocky Mountains, something nobody wanted to acknowledge? I stared out my cabin window, my gaze locking onto the distant silhouette of Summit Peak. I glared at those pristine, perfectly groomed white slopes that thousands of oblivious people would ski down today, completely unaware of the impossible nightmare I had uncovered last night. And I found myself deeply wondering what horror would inevitably manifest tonight. Would I stumble across yet another singular track? Or perhaps, this time around, would I actually see the entity responsible for carving it? I officially showed up for my graveyard shift that evening armed with my personal high-definition camera, a vastly superior tactical flashlight, and a compact thermal imaging monocular I had purchased several years prior for spotting wildlife. If a reality-bending anomaly decided to happen on my mountain tonight, I was going to be completely prepared. Shelby was stationed inside the patrol office when I checked in. "How did you sleep?" she asked. "Fine," I smoothly lied. She intensely studied my facial features for a prolonged moment. "Look, regarding last night, it's completely fine. You were probably right. I was highly likely just exhausted and seeing things." "That actually isn't what She hesitated, biting her lip. "Actually, I wanted to show you something." She quickly pulled up a file on her terminal and physically angled the monitor toward my side of the desk. It was an undeniably clear thermal image captured directly from one of the resort's dedicated infrared security arrays, the optics specifically engineered to monitor for overnight activity. "This particular image was taken last night," she explained quietly, "occurring at roughly the exact same time you discovered those tracks." The digital image clearly displayed the sprawling north face runs captured from an elevated perspective. The overwhelming majority of the screen was washed in the deep blues and purples indicative of cold snow. However, running directly down the center of freefall was a distinct, razor-thin orange line. A highly undeniable heat signature. It was positioned exactly where I had found the terminated ski track. "What exactly am I looking at right now?" I asked. "That is exactly what I'm trying to figure out." She tapped the screen. That specific heat signature shouldn't be there. The run was entirely empty. The visual cameras recorded absolutely nothing, but the highly sensitive thermal array picked up something distinctly warm actively moving down the slope. I felt an icy chill run down my spine. Exactly how warm are we talking? Not excessively hot. Perhaps a mere 10 degrees warmer than the surrounding frozen snow, but enough to definitively register on the sensors. So, something physical was undeniably present. Something was generating a thermal output. "You mean someone," I corrected her immediately. "That could be a lot of things," she countered. "Perhaps localized underground thermal activity. Maybe a bizarre equipment malfunction. Or perhaps someone genuinely was actively skiing down that closed slope, and the standard optical arrays simply couldn't see them." Shelby abruptly closed the digital file. "I am not jumping to any wild conclusions here, but I am going to aggressively monitor the feeds tonight. I require you to radio in every single time you change slopes. If you observe anything even remotely unusual, and I mean literally anything, you call me immediately." "Understood. Copy that." I immediately headed out to my massive snowcat, but right before I initiated my scheduled grooming route, I deliberately took a detour. I forcefully drove the rig up to freefall and parked at the exact geographic coordinate where the singular track had impossibly ended the previous night. In the daylight, completely groomed over by my own heavy blade, there was absolutely nothing anomalous to witness. Just perfect corduroy snow, exactly identical to every other standard run on the entire mountain. However, I had explicitly marked the GPS coordinates on my smartphone last night, and I wanted to check the exact spot one final time. I climbed out of the heated cab and walked to the specific location. The powder appeared entirely ordinary now. Nevertheless, I retrieved my thermal monocular and meticulously scanned the immediate area anyway. Initially, I registered absolutely nothing out of the ordinary, just the standard temperature variations you'd expect in an alpine snowpack. Slightly warmer where the sun had hit during the day, significantly colder in the deep shadows. Then, I saw it. It was a faint heat signature, barely managing to register on the digital thermal scale, running in a straight line directly down the steep incline. It was almost entirely invisible, measuring merely a few degrees warmer than the surrounding frozen landscape, but it was undeniably there. And it flawlessly followed the exact trajectory where I had witnessed the physics-defying ski track the evening before. I quickly snapped photographs utilizing my smartphone, capturing the images directly through the thermal monocular's digital eyepiece. The resulting photos were grainy, but you could distinctly make out the line if you possessed the knowledge of what to look for. Whatever impossible entity had carved that single track had undeniably left behind some form of residual thermal energy. And incredibly, that faint heat was stubbornly persisting 12 hours later. I radioed Shelby. "I am currently holding position at the site from last night. I am actively picking up a distinct thermal signature on my personal imaging equipment." "What kind of signature?" "Incredibly faint. Highly linear. It aggressively runs down the slope, flawlessly following the track from last night." "Hold your position. I am coming up." While I anxiously waited, I meticulously tracked the thermal signature backward, tracing it down the slope. It remained perfectly consistent the entire distance, never fluctuating in its ambient temperature or its width. At the absolute bottom of the run, exactly where the ski track had initially materialized, the thermal signature simply began. No lead-up, no gradual warming, just an abrupt starting point. When Shelby finally arrived on her patrol snowmobile, she had brought the resort's professional-grade thermal camera rig with her. "Show me," she demanded. I pointed out the faint signature through the lens of my monocular, and she aggressively scanned the designated area with her superior hardware. Her corporate equipment was vastly more sensitive than my personal gear, and I could vividly see her facial expression change as she studied the digital readouts. "This is absolutely not underground thermal activity," she murmured quietly. The active heat source is strictly resting at surface level, hovering right on top of the snow. What on earth could potentially cause a phenomenon like that? I honestly don't know. She began snapping her own high-resolution photographs, adjusting the camera settings and testing wildly different infrared wavelengths. Whatever this entity actually is, it is entirely inconsistent with any naturally occurring phenomenon I have ever seen. It is far too uniform. It is too surgically precise, like it was intentionally left behind by something highly artificial. She didn't formulate a response, but I could clearly read in her eyes that she was silently arriving at the exact same terrifying conclusion I had. We exhausted the subsequent 20 minutes meticulously documenting the thermal signature. Shelby logged highly precise physical measurements, actively checked the core snow temperature utilizing a probe thermometer, and collected physical samples. The snow itself felt entirely ordinary, cold, dry powder. But the advanced thermal cameras absolutely did not lie. Something distinctly warm had occupied this exact space. I need to report this data, Shelby finally announced. To who, exactly? Upper management first? Then, perhaps. I honestly don't know, someone who specifically studies this bizarre kind of phenomena. Are you implying we contact UFO researchers? She shot me a highly skeptical glare. I mean legitimate scientists. Professionals who possess the resources to properly analyze this raw data. Shelby, you personally saw the online reports. We are absolutely not the only isolated resort where this nightmare is actively happening. I reviewed a massive pile of completely unverified claims posted on paranormal message boards. That absolutely does not constitute hard evidence. Neither did your bizarre ski track, frankly, until you successfully pinpointed this residual thermal signature. She fell completely silent for a long moment, staring blankly down the steep slope at the invisible, glowing line that only our advanced optics could perceive. Let's just get through tonight, she stated firmly. You execute your standard grooming loops. I will aggressively monitor the entire camera network. If anything else attempts to manifest, we are going to have the event thoroughly documented 6 ways from Sunday. I burned through the next several hours dutifully grooming the beginner and intermediate hills, yet my focus was violently split. Every single time I dared to cast a glance toward the significantly higher elevations, toward the brutal expert slopes where I had initially stumbled upon the tracks, I found myself completely terrified, wondering if the nightmare would repeat itself. Right around 2 a.m., I successfully completed the western slopes and pivoted the massive snowcat back up the mountain to tackle the north face. As I slowly approached Avalanche Alley, the very first slope where the impossible track had manifested, I noticed something deeply odd. The physical surface of the snow possessed a highly strange texture. It wasn't uncharacteristically lumpy or rough. It just looked fundamentally different, exactly as if an unseen entity had deliberately applied an impossibly fine mist over the entire slope, generating a highly subtle sheen that actively caught the glare of my heavy headlights. I instantly killed the snowcat's forward momentum and scrambled out of the cab to investigate the anomaly. The bizarre sheen was absolutely real. The uppermost layer of the powder, perhaps a mere single millimeter in thickness, possessed a bizarre, crystalline quality that was entirely unnatural. When I pressed my heavy work glove against it, the fabric came away slightly damp, yet the extracted moisture was impossibly cold. It felt significantly colder than the actual snowpack beneath it. I immediately retrieved my thermal monocular again. The entire sprawling slope was actively radiating a faint heat signature. It wasn't a massive thermal spike, perhaps just a single degree or two elevated above the standard baseline, but it completely blanketed the whole run from the absolute peak down to the base. It looked exactly as if a colossal, superheated entity had slowly passed directly over the airspace, warming the surface powder slightly in its wake. Patrol Base, this is Harlan. Go ahead with your report, Harlan. It was Shelby, her voice tight. I am currently holding position on Avalanche Alley. There is something fundamentally wrong with the powder up here. It is actively projecting a uniform thermal signature completely across the entire run. The entire Massive run? Affirmative. It appears exactly as if an invisible mass recently passed directly over it, faintly warming the surface. Stand by. I am aggressively checking the thermal feeds. I waited in the freezing void, silently watching my rapid breath fog violently in the cold air. The mountain wind had picked up a fraction, but absolutely not with enough force to rationally explain the phenomenon I was currently staring at. Harlan, the master thermal cameras explicitly confirm exactly what you are describing. The entirety of the run is actively showing an elevated temperature state. Furthermore, it is absolutely not isolated to Avalanche Alley. I am actively tracking the exact same thermal wash blanketing Freefall and Black Thunder, all of the North Face expert runs. That appears to be the case. Hold your exact position. I am deploying up to your coordinates immediately. While I anxiously awaited her arrival, I scrambled back into the heated cab of my snowcat and aggressively locked the heavy doors. Something regarding the atmosphere of the night suddenly felt unspeakably malevolent. The suffocating darkness felt exponentially deeper, the mountain silence infinitely more complete. Even the comforting, familiar sounds of my own heavy machinery sounded bizarrely muted and distant. I relentlessly continued sweeping the steep slopes utilizing my thermal monocular, and that is precisely the exact moment I saw it. Movement. Positioned incredibly high up on the treacherous slope, lingering dangerously close to the dense treeline, an entity was actively moving. It registered brilliantly on the thermal imaging display as a blindingly white, distinctly humanoid figure, burning significantly hotter than the frozen environment surrounding it. However, the exact moment I dropped the monocular and scanned the ridge with my naked eyes, there was absolutely nothing occupying that space. The entity was flawlessly descending the steep slope, executing impeccably smooth, highly controlled movements, perfectly mimicking a master skier. Yet, there were absolutely zero ski tracks magically appearing in the pristine powder. There was absolutely zero visible presence, literally nothing my biological eyes could physically detect. The entity's existence was solely betrayed by the blazing thermal signature. I snatched my tactical radio, my hands convulsing with pure adrenaline. Shelby, I have confirmed movement on Avalanche Alley. I am actively tracking it on the thermal band, but it is completely invisible visually. What specific classification of movement? It perfectly resembles a human aggressively skiing down the ridge, but there is absolutely no physical mass present. I mean, my biological eyes literally cannot see a single thing, but the thermal lens shows a massive figure rapidly descending the slope. I am actively tracking it on our master cameras as well. Her vocal tone was stretched to the absolute breaking point. Harlan, you are to remain securely locked inside your snowcat. Do not breach the cabin doors for any conceivable reason. Copy that command. I remained utterly paralyzed, staring intensely through my thermal monocular as the invisible entity relentlessly continued its descent down the terrifying slope. The biomechanical movement was incredibly fluid, an absolute masterclass demonstration of skiing technique, executing flawless carved turns and maintaining perfect edge control, perfectly mirroring the physics-defying track I had stumbled upon the night before. The blazing figure effortlessly glided within 50 feet of my parked snowcat, and I was finally granted my first crystal-clear look at its structure through the thermal imager. It was fundamentally not shaped like a terrestrial human being. The overall heat signature was roughly the general dimensions of a man, perhaps measuring 6 feet in total height, but the anatomical proportions were completely, horrifyingly off. The central torso was vastly too elongated, the forelimbs impossibly thin, and there was a significantly more disturbing variable. The biological heat distribution was completely incorrect. Standard human beings possess highly distinct thermal hotspots: the central core, the cranium, the friction zones under the arms. This terrifying figure radiated a flawlessly uniform, totally even heat signature entirely across its whole body. The exact millisecond it glided past my vehicle, I physically felt something. It wasn't a tangible, physical sensation, but an overwhelming presence. It felt exactly like standing shoulder to shoulder with an unseen stranger in a pitch-black room, You completely lack the ability to see them, but your primal instincts scream that they are undeniably there. The atmospheric pressure inside the cabin violently shifted, and there was an incredibly faint humming noise vibrating just at the absolute edge of human hearing. And then, the entity was completely gone. It relentlessly continued its descent down the steep slope, miraculously leaving absolutely zero physical tracks, abandoning zero tangible evidence of its passage, save for that terrifyingly faint, residual thermal warmth bleeding into the snow. I sat utterly frozen inside my heavy snowcat, my hands welded in a death grip around the steering column, desperately fighting to mentally process the cosmic horror I had just witnessed. My tactical radio violently crackled. "Harlan, did you manage to track its trajectory?" It seamlessly continued its descent down the slope, heading directly toward the mid-mountain lodge structure. "Shelby, what in the absolute hell was that entity?" I genuinely have no logical answer, but we successfully documented it on camera. Multiple independent angles utilizing both the thermal and infrared arrays. Whatever that entity actually is, it is undeniably real. Real, but absolutely not human. Not any known biological animal I had ever encountered in my life. Something entirely else. "I am rapidly approaching your current coordinates," Shelby announced over the static. "Do absolutely not move your rig." I remained paralyzed inside that cabin for what psychologically felt like an entire agonizing hour, but in reality was highly likely only a grueling 10 minutes. When the piercing headlights of Shelby's patrol snowmobile finally crested the ridge, I had absolutely never been more profoundly relieved to lay eyes on another human being. She aggressively parked her machine directly adjacent to my massive snowcat and quickly scrambled up the metal ladder to my cab. I violently unlocked the door, and she frantically slid into the heated passenger seat. "Show me the captured footage immediately," she demanded. I quickly initiated the digital playback on my thermal monocular's compact screen. The horrifying figure materialized, fluidly descended the slope, glided effortlessly past our exact coordinates, and completely vanished into the dark, burning crystal clear on the thermal band, yet existing completely invisible to the naked eye. "It is absolutely not emitting a single photon of light within the visible optical spectrum," Shelby whispered quietly, her eyes locked on the screen. "It is solely radiating thermal heat. That is precisely why we cannot perceive it with our biological eyes or standard optical cameras." "But what the hell is it?" I have been conducting some incredibly deep research since the events of last night. She quickly pulled out her smartphone and loaded a highly encrypted digital file. There has been an absolute flood of similar sightings explicitly reported at high-altitude ski resorts scattered entirely across the Rockies for the past 3 solid months. Massive thermal signatures operating completely devoid of a visible physical source. Catastrophic, localized equipment malfunctions. And most terrifyingly, massive time loss formally reported among resort staff operating the graveyard shifts. Time loss. Dozens of heavy snowcat operators and night patrol operatives formally reporting severe, unexplainable gaps in their chronological memory. They will be actively executing their standard mundane routines, and then suddenly, without warning, it is literally 2 hours later and they possess absolutely zero recollection of what transpired during the void. I felt a violent, icy chill aggressively cascade down my spine that had absolutely nothing to do with the freezing mountain air outside the cabin. "Has that specific phenomenon ever happened to you?" she asked quietly. "No, but I honestly haven't been assigned to the graveyard rotation very often this particular season." She locked eyes with me, her expression intensely serious. "Harlan, I need you to think very carefully. Has anything even remotely resembling that scenario ever happened to you? Literally any occasion where you found yourself entirely unable to account for your physical whereabouts?" I desperately threw my mind back, analyzing the past several months. The overwhelming majority of my shifts were incredibly routine, entirely predictable. However, there had undeniably been a handful of specific nights where I had somehow completed my grooming assignments significantly faster than mathematically expected, or instances where I had suddenly arrived at a distant slope and fundamentally couldn't recall physically driving the massive rig there. I had always comfortably written those events off as extreme fatigue, my brain simply switching over to an unconscious autopilot mode. But what if it was genuinely something significantly more terrifying? Maybe, I finally admitted reluctantly. There have definitely been a few isolated instances where I've heavily zoned out, but I simply assumed I was just dangerously exhausted. Or perhaps they were actively scanning your biology, systematically studying you. Whatever highly advanced entities are actively generating these impossible thermal signatures. I genuinely do not believe they originate from Earth, Harlan. And there it finally was. The terrifying, unspoken hypothesis we had both been cautiously dancing around for the past 48 hours. UFOs. Extraterrestrial entities. Whatever horrifying label you wanted to slap on them. So, what is our operational game plan? I asked, my voice remarkably hollow. We meticulously document every single variable, and we wait. She cast a slow, deeply terrified gaze out the cabin window toward the pitch-black slopes. Because I strongly suspect they are absolutely not finished with us yet. We remained locked inside that idling cabin in absolute silence for a very long time, simply staring out at the vast, empty mountain range. The glowing thermal signature previously painting Avalanche Alley was rapidly fading out now, the top layer of snow organically returning to its standard baseline temperature. But I inherently knew with absolute certainty that it would inevitably return. Whatever this horrifying entity actually was, it was relentlessly drawn to these specific slopes, returning night after terrifying night. I really should complete my assigned grooming schedule, I finally muttered into the silence. I will physically follow your rig, she stated firmly. Effective immediately, you do absolutely not operate on this mountain alone. We aggressively burned through the remainder of the freezing night, operating strictly in tandem. Shelby closely trailed my massive snowcat, utilizing her patrol snowmobile as I relentlessly ground out run after grueling run. We didn't officially encounter any additional thermal anomalies, but that suffocating, primal sensation of being clinically watched never evaporated for a single second. When the dawn finally broke and my grueling shift officially terminated, I carefully drove the rig back to the equipment yard, feeling profoundly physically exhausted, yet completely psychologically wired. Shelby intercepted me in the main parking lot. I am aggressively compiling every single scrap of evidence we possess, she announced. The high-resolution photographs, the thermal telemetry, the time-stamped logs. I strongly believe we urgently need to forward this massive data package to an independent professional who possesses the capacity to properly analyze it. Who exactly do you have in mind? I successfully located a highly credentialed physics professor operating out of the University of Colorado who explicitly specializes in high-altitude atmospheric anomalies. He might potentially possess the capability to decode this raw thermal data. And if he ultimately can't decode it? She slowly tilted her head back, staring up at the towering mountain peak, which was now brilliantly bathed in the soft pink light of the sunrise. Then we simply keep watching, and we desperately pray that they are solely here to observe, and not preparing to execute something significantly worse. Dr. Marcus Reeves arrived at Summit Peak Resort 3 days later. He was a physics professor specializing in atmospheric phenomena, and according to Shelby, he'd been studying unusual thermal readings at high-altitude locations for years. I met him in Shelby's office that afternoon before my shift. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with the kind of intense focus that made you feel like he was analyzing everything he looked at. "Mr. Pierce," he said, shaking my hand. "Shelby has shown me your footage. Remarkable stuff. You believe it's real?" "Oh, I know it's real. I've been tracking similar occurrences at 17 different ski resorts across the Rockies. What you've captured here is some of the clearest thermal evidence I've seen." He opened his laptop and showed us a map of the western United States. Red dots marked locations across Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. These are all ski resorts that have reported unusual thermal signatures in the past 6 months, he said. The activity started in September and has been increasing steadily. Most resorts dismiss it as equipment malfunction or natural phenomena, but the patterns are too consistent. What kind of patterns? I asked. He pulled up a graph showing thermal readings over time. The signatures appear primarily at high-altitude locations between 10,000 and 13,000 feet. They're most active between midnight and 4 a.m., and they're always associated with isolated individuals, snowcat operators, patrol members, people working alone at night. Like they're observing us, Shelby said, or studying us. The thermal profiles are unlike anything in nature. The heat distribution is too uniform, the temperature too consistent. Whatever these are, they're not biological organisms as we understand them. So, what are they? I asked. Dr. Reeves looked at us both seriously. Based on the data, and I know how this sounds, but I believe we're dealing with non-terrestrial observation craft of some kind. UFOs in the literal sense. But these aren't the lights in the sky variety. These are something more subtle, more sophisticated. Why ski resorts? Shelby asked. Why here specifically? I have a theory about that. High-altitude locations offer thin atmosphere, low light pollution, and isolated human subjects. It's an ideal environment for observation. And ski resorts provide a controlled setting. The same people, the same routines night after night, perfect for long-term study. I felt my skin crawl. How long have they been watching us? Based on the data, possibly years. But the activity has intensified recently. Something's changed. Changed how? I asked. That's what I'm here to find out. He pulled out several pieces of equipment: thermal cameras, electromagnetic sensors, radiation detectors. Tonight, I want to set up monitoring equipment at the locations where you've had the most activity. With your permission, I'd like to observe while you do your regular grooming run. Shelby and I exchanged glances. You're putting yourself at risk, she said. We don't know what these things are capable of. Which is exactly why we need to gather more data. He looked at me. Mr. Pierce, you've been in closer contact with these entities than anyone. Has there been any physical effect? Missing time? Unusual marks on your body? Health changes? I thought about the nights I couldn't fully remember. The exhaustion that went deeper than normal fatigue. Maybe. I'm not sure. I'd like to give you a thorough medical scan if you're willing, just to establish a baseline. That night, I found myself sitting in an examination chair in the resort's medical clinic while Dr. Reeves ran various tests. Blood pressure, brain scan, full-body thermal imaging. Everything came back normal except for one thing. Your core temperature is slightly elevated, Dr. Reeves said, frowning at his tablet. About half a degree above normal. Not enough to cause concern, but it's consistent across multiple readings. What does that mean? I'm not sure yet, but it's interesting. Several other individuals who've had close encounters with these entities show similar elevated temperatures. Encounters? You mean I'm not the first? You're not even the 10th. He showed me a file with names and dates. Over 30 people across different resorts have reported experiences similar to yours. Most don't talk about it publicly because they're afraid of being labeled crazy, but the pattern is clear. I looked at the list of names of people I'd never met who'd seen the same impossible things I had. Somehow, knowing I wasn't alone made it less frightening. So what happens now? I asked. Now we go up the mountain, and we see if they come back. At midnight, I started my grooming run with Dr. Reeves riding along in the passenger seat of my snowcat. Shelby followed on her snowmobile, and all three of us were equipped with thermal imaging equipment. The night was clear and cold, 10 degrees with no wind. Perfect conditions for observation, Dr. Reeves said. Whatever these entities are, they seem to prefer calm nights when the atmosphere is stable. I started with the beginner slopes, working my way up to the expert terrain as usual. Dr. Reeves watched his monitors intently, occasionally making notes on his tablet. Nothing yet, he said as we finished the intermediate runs. But the night's young. Around 1:30 a.m., we reached the north face. I felt my pulse quicken as I approached Avalanche Alley, the first run where I'd seen the track. "Harlan, I'm picking up something," Shelby radioed from behind us. "Thermal anomaly at the tree-line, top of Avalanche Alley." Dr. Reeves immediately switched his monitors to maximum sensitivity. "I see it. Temperature approximately 15 degrees above ambient, moving slowly." 17 minutes, I said. 17. She sounded shaken. "Harlan, I don't remember any of it. 1 second I was following you, the next all my systems crashed. And then they came back online and it was 17 minutes later." Dr. Reeves was staring at his equipment, scrolling through data that had somehow recorded despite everything being powered down. "Impossible," he muttered. "The sensors recorded the entire event. We shouldn't have any data. The equipment was completely dead. But it's all here. What does it show?" I asked. He turned his tablet toward me. The screen showed a complex array of readings. Electromagnetic fields, radiation levels, atmospheric pressure, all spiking and fluctuating in patterns that looked like waves on an ocean. "They were scanning us," he said quietly. "Taking measurements, analyzing our biological and technological signatures. This is the most comprehensive data I've ever seen on these entities. It's incredible." "They didn't just scan us," I said. "They showed us something. Made us understand something." "What do you mean?" I tried to put into words the understanding I'd received, but it was like trying to describe a color that doesn't exist. "They're preparing us for something that's coming. Something we need to be ready for." Dr. Reeves studied my face. "You had direct contact, didn't you? Mental contact." "I think so. It wasn't words or images. It was just knowing." He nodded slowly. "I've read accounts from other contactees who describe similar experiences. A direct transfer of information that bypasses language entirely. It's how they communicate among themselves." "So, what do we do with this information?" Shelby asked, riding up on her snowmobile. "Do we report it? Tell people who would believe us?" "Even with all this data, people will find ways to dismiss it," I said. "Equipment malfunction, atmospheric phenomena, mass hallucination." "Some people will believe," Dr. Reeves said. "The scientific community is starting to take these encounters seriously. With this data, we can make a compelling case." "But what if they don't want to be discovered yet?" I asked. "What if we're not supposed to go public? Then why reveal themselves to us at all?" I thought about the entity pointing at me, about that moment of understanding. Because we're the ones working alone at night. The ones who are already isolated from the mainstream. We're the test cases. They're seeing how we react, how we process the information, whether we can handle the truth. "And can we?" Shelby asked quietly. I looked up at the mountain. The resort would open in a few hours, and thousands of people would ski these same runs, completely unaware of what had happened here. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I don't think we have a choice. They're here. They're watching. And whatever they're preparing us for, it's happening whether we're ready or not." We spent the rest of the night together, finishing the grooming runs as a group. None of us wanted to be alone anymore. Dr. Reeves documented everything, taking samples of the snow where the entities had stood, collecting data that would take months to fully analyze. When the sun finally rose, painting the peaks in shades of gold and pink, we gathered at the base lodge. The resort was coming to life around us. "What happens now?" I asked Dr. Reeves. "Now I take this data back to the university and present it to my colleagues. Some will be skeptical, but some will want to investigate further. And we keep monitoring, keep documenting, because this isn't over." "They'll come back," Shelby said. It wasn't a question. "They never left," Dr. Reeves replied. "We just can't always see them." That was 3 weeks ago. I'm still driving the snowcat at Summit Peak, still working the night shift, still grooming those same runs. But everything's different now. I see them sometimes on the thermal imaging. Brief flashes of heat where there should be only cold. They're always there, watching, measuring, studying. And I'm not afraid anymore. Not exactly. What I feel is more like anticipation, like standing on the edge of something enormous that will change everything. Dr. Reeves calls me once a week with updates. Some colleagues dismiss his data, others are intrigued, a few are quietly terrified. Shelby and I keep our eyes on the sky. We document every sighting, building a record that can't be dismissed as easily as a single incident. Because this isn't just happening at Summit Peak. It's happening at high-altitude locations where the boundary between Earth and space grows thin. They're everywhere. Watching. Waiting. Preparing us. The next time you're on a ski slope at night, look up. Look for the heat that has no source. The movement that leaves no tracks. The presence that exists only at the edge of perception. They're there. They've always been there. And they're waiting to see if we're finally ready to understand. You know that feeling when you look at a clock and the time doesn't make sense? When you're absolutely certain only a few minutes have passed, but somehow an hour is gone. That happened to me on March 7th, and it wasn't just me who noticed. The radio logs proved it. The GPS data confirmed it. And the tracks in the snow, or lack of them, made it impossible to deny. My name is Jesse Marwood, and I work night patrol at Black Ridge Resort in Colorado. It's one of those jobs most people don't think about. While everyone's sleeping, we're up on the mountain making sure everything's safe for the next day. Lonely work, but I've always liked the solitude. During the day, Black Ridge is packed with skiers and families. But after the lifts close at 4 p.m., it becomes this vast, empty wilderness. Just snow, silence, and the occasional howl of wind. I've been working nights here for 7 years. You get used to the isolation. You learn to navigate by feel as much as by sight. And you definitely learn the difference between 2 minutes and 13 minutes. That's what this story is about. 13 minutes that shouldn't exist. It started like any normal night. I clocked in at 9 p.m., got my assignment sheet from Kurt Langen, the patrol supervisor, and headed out on my snowmobile around 9:30. The temperature was holding at 8 degrees, wind was calm, sky was clear. Perfect conditions. My route covered the western sector. About 20 square miles of terrain, including 2 warming huts and 3 weather stations. The whole circuit usually takes about 4 hours. I reached the first warming hut at 10:15 and did my standard check. Doors locked, windows intact. I logged it in my tablet and continued on. The second warming hut was about 3 miles away, up near the 11,000-foot elevation line. I was making good time cruising along the maintenance roads. At 10:41 p.m., I radioed in my position. Patrol base, this is Jesse. I'm approaching Ridge Hut 2. ETA 2 minutes. Kurt's voice came back immediately. Copy that, Jesse. Report when you arrive. I could see the hut ahead of me now, maybe a quarter mile up the trail. 2 minutes was accurate. I'd driven this route hundreds of times. I kept my eyes on the trail ahead, my headlights sweeping across the snow. Just for a second, I saw something off to my right. A brief flash of blue-white light, like someone had taken a photo with a bright flash. But there was no one out there. I slowed down and turned my head, but whatever it was gone. Probably just my headlights reflecting off ice, I told myself. I continued toward the hut, but something felt wrong now. The air seemed heavier, and my ears had that muffled feeling you get when pressure changes quickly. The hut was right ahead of me now, maybe 100 yards. I started to slow down, preparing to park. And then I was there. Not pulling up to it, not parking. Just suddenly there. Snowmobile stopped, engine idling, sitting in front of the hut like I'd been there for a while. I blinked, confused. Had I zoned out? I looked down at my watch. 10:54 p.m. That couldn't be right. I'd radioed Kurt at 10:41, said I'd be there in 2 minutes. It was now 10:54. That was 13 minutes. I must have misread my watch earlier, I thought. I shook off the weird feeling and radioed in. Patrol base, this is Jesse. I'm at Ridge Hut 2. Static. Then Kurt's voice, and something about his tone was off. Jesse. Copy. Can you repeat your last transmission? I said I'm at Ridge Hut 2 doing my inspection now. A pause longer than normal. Jesse, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Why? Because you've been on the radio for the last 13 minutes. I felt my stomach drop. What? Your radio's been transmitting. Open mic. I've been hearing engine noise, static, some kind of interference, but you weren't responding to my calls. That's impossible. I just got here. Jesse, I've been trying to reach you since 10:43. Your radio's been broadcasting continuously. I looked down at my radio. It was on the correct channel. Volume normal. Kurt, from my perspective, I radioed you at 10:41 saying I'd be here in 2 minutes, and now I'm here. It's 10:54 on my watch. Another long pause. It's 10:54 on my end, too. But Jesse, you radioed me at 10:41. And then your radio went live at 10:42 and stayed live until just now. 13 minutes of open transmission. What was being transmitted? Engine noise mostly. And this weird, high-pitched sound like feedback, but not quite. And your engine sounded wrong, like the pitch kept changing. I felt cold. I don't remember any of that. Can you check your snowmobile's trip computer? See what it says for time and distance since your last stop. I pulled up the display. I'd reset it at the first warming hut. The display showed trip time 0:31, distance 3.2 miles. 31 minutes from the first hut to here. That was perfectly normal. Kurt, my trip computer shows 31 minutes since my last stop. That's correct for this distance, but your watch shows 10:54, and you radioed me at 10:41 saying you'd arrive in 2 minutes. So, either your computer is wrong, or you lost 13 minutes somewhere and don't remember it. Jesse, I want you to come back to base right now. Kurt's voice was firm. What? Why? I have 3 more stations to check. Because something's wrong. Please just come back. We'll sort this out. Kurt didn't spook easily. If he was worried enough to call me back, something was genuinely off. Okay, I'm heading back now. Good. And keep your radio on. I want to hear you the whole way down. I turned around, heading back the way I'd come. My own tracks were clearly visible in the snow. As I rode, I kept up a running commentary for Kurt, but I was obsessing over those 13 missing minutes. I watched my watch tick by normally. I'd been riding for about 5 minutes when I saw something that made me stop. My tracks, the ones I'd made on my way up to the hut, ran along the trail in front of me. But about 200 yards ahead, where the trail curved around a small aspen grove, the tracks just stopped. Not faded out, not covered by snow. Just stopped, like I'd driven to that point and vanished into thin air. I pulled up to where the tracks ended. The trail continued on ahead, untouched snow extending into the darkness. Kurt, are you seeing this on GPS? Seeing what? I see your location at the Aspen Grove. My tracks from earlier, they end here. Like I never went past this point. Silence on the radio. That's impossible. You radioed from the hut. You were there. I know I was there, but my tracks say I wasn't. I walked forward, examining the snow. It was undisturbed. No snowmobile tracks. But when I tried to recall the actual drive from this point to the hut, my memory felt fuzzy, like trying to remember a dream. Jesse, come back to base now. I'm coming. I got back on my snowmobile and continued down. My tracks were continuous now, all the way back to base. At 11:07, I radioed Kurt. I'm about 10 minutes out. Copy. I'll meet you in the lot. 10 minutes to base. Easy ride. But when I pulled into the parking lot and killed my engine, my watch read 11:19. 12 minutes, not 10. Kurt was waiting for me. Your radio went silent at 11:09, he said. Dead air for 10 minutes, then you pulled in. I was riding that whole time. Your GPS track shows you moving normally. But Jesse, look at this. He held out his tablet showing the GPS log. The track was a clear line up to Ridge Hut 2 and back. But there was a gap right around the Aspen Grove. The GPS shows you at the Grove at 10:42, Kurt said. Then nothing until 10:54 when you suddenly appeared at the hut. 12 minutes with no position data. Not 13, I noted. The radio was live for 13 minutes, but the GPS gap was 12 minutes. So, there's a missing minute somewhere. We spent the next hour going over my snowmobile in the garage. Every system was functioning normally. No glitches, no explanation for the missing time or the impossible gap in my tracks. I want you to take the rest of the night off, Kurt said finally. You lost time up there. You don't remember it. That's not fine. I changed out of my gear and walked to my truck. It was 12:30 a.m. now. As I was unlocking my truck, I noticed the clock on my dashboard, 12:28. My watch, 12:30. My phone, 12:30. The truck was 2 minutes slow. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo app. I'd taken a selfie that morning before work. The timestamp on the photo said 5:47 p.m., but I'd taken it at 5:45. I was sure of that. Either my watch was 2 minutes fast, or my phone and truck were 2 minutes slow. Or time itself was doing something strange around me. When I got to my apartment, I checked every clock I owned. Microwave 103, phone 105, watch 105, laptop 104. All slightly different. I pulled up the atomic time display on my phone. 1 hour 5 minutes and 37 seconds. My watch, 1 hour 5 minutes and 38 seconds. 1 second difference. I watched them for a full minute, and the difference didn't change. Both clocks stayed exactly 1 second apart, like something was keeping them offset deliberately. I finally went to bed around 2 a.m., but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those 13 missing minutes, the gap in my tracks, and the way time seemed to flow differently up there. I fell asleep eventually, and when I woke up, it was to my phone ringing. Kurt's name on the screen. Yeah, I answered, groggy. Jesse, can you come in? It's important. What time is it? 3 p.m. I know you just woke up, but I need to show you something. I drove back to Black Ridge, my body still heavy with exhaustion. Kurt met me in the patrol office, and he looked like he hadn't slept at all. I reviewed all the radio recordings from last night, he said without preamble. I pulled the audio file from your 13-minute transmission, and you need to hear this. He pulled up an audio file and hit play. At first, it was just engine noise and static. But underneath it, barely audible, was a high-pitched tone that seemed to pulse and shift. What is that? I asked. Listen to what happens next. He fast-forwarded about 5 minutes. The engine noise changed, becoming higher-pitched, then lower, like someone was revving the throttle. Then there was a sound I couldn't identify. Almost like voices, but not quite, like someone speaking in a frequency human voices don't reach. Is that me? I whispered. I don't think so, but it's coming from your radio. The strange sounds continued, rising and falling, occasionally resolving into something that sounded almost like words before dissolving back into that weird tonal quality. Then abruptly it stopped, and my voice came through clear. Patrol base, this is Jesse. I'm at Ridge Hut 2. That's when the 13 minutes ended, Kurt said. I stared at the waveform on his screen. So, for 13 minutes, something was transmitting through my radio. Kurt hesitated. I sent the audio file to a friend who works in SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. He says the pattern is consistent with modulated carrier waves, like something is encoding information into the signal. What kind of information? He couldn't decode it, but he said it's not natural interference. The signal characteristics are wrong for your VHF frequency. They're more consistent with something in the microwave range, like a satellite or advanced radar. I felt cold. You think they were downloading something into my head? I was wearing my earpiece. I think something interacted with your equipment in ways we don't understand, Kurt said. He pulled up another screen. I also reviewed all the security camera footage. At exactly 10:43, when you were at Ridge Hut 2, every camera on the mountain experienced a brief interference spike. An electromagnetic pulse strong enough to affect everything simultaneously, but not strong enough to destroy it. A signal, I said quietly. They were announcing their presence. And they waited until you were stationary, Kurt added, looking at the timestamps. Probably so you wouldn't crash. Jesse, if you go back up there tonight, they're going to make contact again. I thought about those missing minutes, the backward clock, the blue-white flash. I want to know what they want. And if the answer is something we can't handle, at least we'll know. Kurt nodded slowly. Tonight, we go together. Full monitoring, constant communication. That evening, as I geared up, I felt a strange calm. Kurt had outfitted my snowmobile with additional GPS trackers, backup radios, and 2 cameras. We headed out at 9:30 p.m., following the same route. Kurt stayed 20 yards behind me, checking in every 30 seconds. The night was clear, temperature at 9 degrees, no wind. Everything was normal. At 10:38, we reached the aspen grove. I slowed down, remembering how my tracks had disappeared here 2 nights ago. Tonight, the snow was undisturbed. Kurt, I'm at the grove. Everything looks normal. Copy. I'm seeing you clearly. I continued past the spot where my tracks had ended. No weird pressure changes, no muffled hearing. I reached Ridge Hut 2 at exactly 10:43. 2 minutes after leaving the grove, just like it should be. Kurt, I'm at the hut. GPS shows I'm at the hut. Time is correct. Copy all that. Looks like tonight is normal. I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. I got off my snowmobile to do my inspection. That's when I noticed my dashboard. The engine hour meter, the one that tracks total running time. 00039. I stared at it. When I'd started my shift, I'd noted the meter reading. 00041. The mechanical engine hour meter had gone backward by 2 minutes. Kurt, I said slowly. The engine hour meter on my snowmobile. It's showing 00039. Silence on the radio. Then, Jesse, that's impossible. Engine hour meters are mechanical. They only count forward. I'm looking at it right now. Hold on. Your trip computer shows you've been running for 1 hour and 9 minutes. That's correct for the time elapsed. But the mechanical hour meter. I'm seeing it on your camera feed. It shows 00039. I stood there in the cold. 2 minutes gone, like they'd been erased from the machine's memory. Jesse, I want you to come back, Kurt said. Don't finish the route. I looked up at the dark sky, at the stars bright and cold above the mountains. And I felt it again, that sense of being watched, of something vast paying attention to me. Okay, I said. I'm coming back. We rode back to base without incident. In the garage, Kurt connected his diagnostic computer to my snowmobile. According to the ECU, the engine had been running for the correct amount of time. The electronic systems say one thing, but the mechanical counter says another, Kurt said. Mechanical meters don't glitch. What if your engine actually ran less time than it should have? I was riding for almost 2 hours. You were riding through space for almost 2 hours. But maybe not through time. Kurt looked at me. I think you moved in a way that normal physics can't track. You weren't in normal spacetime during those missing minutes. He pulled up the incident reports for the past year. Equipment failures, missing time, strange lights. All happening at night, above 10,000 feet, to people working alone. We're going back up, I said. Tomorrow night, we go together. The next night, the ride up to Ridge Hut 2 felt heavier. Kurt stayed close behind me. We reached the Aspen Grove at 10:38. Kurt, I'm at the Grove. Copy. I continued forward. That's when I felt it. A knowing. The same way you know when someone is watching you. Kurt, I feel it. Stay calm. Keep moving. My snowmobile's engine sounded different suddenly, like I was hearing it through water. I looked up. The sky had changed. It was no longer black with stars. It was lighter, almost gray, like dawn, but my watch showed 10:41. What is that? I whispered. I don't know. I'm seeing it too, Kurt said. We stopped our snowmobiles and climbed off. The light was coming from everywhere and nowhere. The snow glowed softly. My radio crackled with static. Through it came that high-pitched tone I'd heard in the recording. But this time, it resolved into concepts, transmitted directly into my brain, bypassing language entirely. Observation, measurement, understanding. They're here, I said. Kurt nodded. He was hearing it too. You perceive time linearly. We do not. To us, all moments exist simultaneously. We move through time as you move through space. The concept was overwhelming, but I understood. To them, past, present, and future were all accessible. Your species interests us. You are transitioning. Transitioning to what? I asked out loud. The answer came as pure understanding. Humans were approaching a perceptual threshold. Our consciousness was expanding beyond linear time. The missing 13 minutes, the backward meter, these were glimpses of nonlinear time. Moments when my consciousness slipped outside the normal flow. We facilitate. We observe. We wait. The light grew brighter. I could see every detail of the snow, and I could perceive them. Not physical bodies, but points of consciousness existing across multiple moments simultaneously. The missing time, I said. It wasn't missing. I was just experiencing those 13 minutes non-linearly. Kurt looked at me. What do you mean? I lived through those 13 minutes, but not in sequence. My consciousness experienced them out of order. Correct. Time cannot be missing. It can only be experienced differently. The engine hour meter, Kurt said slowly. It went backward because linear time is just one way of measuring duration, I finished. Kurt's radio crackled. But the voice wasn't human. It was our own voices, from different moments, overlapping. Kurt, I'm approaching Ridge Hut 2. My voice from the past. This is impossible. My voice from the present. Did we make the right choice coming up here? My voice from the future. They were demonstrating that all these moments existed simultaneously. This is how you experience time, I said. All moments at once. Yes, and soon you will too. Not all of your species, but some. The ones who are ready. Am I ready? You are being prepared. The missing minutes, the backward clock. These are training. They had been observing Earth long enough to watch civilizations rise and fall. The ski resorts were ideal testing grounds, isolated, high altitude, thin atmosphere. We were the early adapters. What happens next? I asked. Next, you remember. Suddenly, I was back in those missing 13 minutes, experiencing them, but conscious and aware. I saw myself arriving, departing, and approaching the hut all at the exact same microsecond. I saw other staff members across the mountain experiencing brief glimpses of nonlinear time. Then I was back in the present, standing next to Kurt in the gray light. I remember, I whispered. I remember all of it. Kurt stared at me. You were gone just for a second. I was in the 13 minutes they showed me. The light began to fade, returning to normal darkness. The vast presence began to withdraw. You will continue to transition. Eventually, You will move through time as naturally as you move through space. Tell others who are ready. This is not abduction. This is awakening. And then they were gone. Did that really just happen? Kurt asked. I looked at my watch. 10:51. 4 minutes had passed since we stopped at the Grove, but I just experienced hours of revelation. Yeah, I said. We rode to Ridge Hut 2. The engine hour meter still read 00039. It was a permanent reminder that my snowmobile now existed partially outside of linear time. Over the next 2 weeks, Kurt and I quietly interviewed the staff members who'd reported strange experiences. When we shared our data, they opened up. The lift operator, the snowcat driver, the patrol member, they were all experiencing aspects of nonlinear time. There are thousands of us across the world, I told Kurt. They're observing as we evolve. That night, in my apartment, I focused on my watch. I really focused, trying to feel the flow of time. And I watched the second hand slow down. 10 seconds became 15, then 20. I was consciously affecting the flow of time around me. Time wasn't a fixed framework, it was something I could perceive and influence. Dr. Reeves from the university contacted us in April. We let him set up his monitoring equipment, though we knew linear instruments could never truly capture nonlinear time. Still, his data would provide legitimacy for others. One night in May, I was on patrol alone. I rode past the Aspen Grove, and I perceived them again. Consciousness without form. You have adapted well. You are the first generation to exist in both states. You are bridges. Will we meet face to face someday? I asked. In time, you will perceive us as clearly as we perceive you. How long will that take? From our perspective, it has already happened. From yours, it is happening now. Thank you for helping us understand, I said. Continue to share your understanding with those who are ready. Time travelers recognize each other even before they fully understand what they are. They withdrew, leaving me alone on the mountain. But the mountain wasn't just a physical space anymore, it was a temporal crossroads. And I wasn't just a patrol worker. I was a bridge between what humanity had been and what we were becoming. When I got back to base, my engine hour meter still read 00039. A badge of honor. Kurt met me in the parking lot. Getting easier? He asked. Yeah. How about you? I predicted 3 equipment failures 2 hours before they happened. It's useful, but weird. It's our weird now. If you work nights at a high-altitude location, a ski resort, an observatory, a weather station, pay attention to the time. Notice when your clocks don't sync. Notice when moments feel elastic. Those aren't glitches. They are signs that you are transitioning. And when you see those flashes of blue-white light, don't be afraid. They're just watching, waiting to see how we handle the gift they're helping us discover. The gift of time itself.